Chapter 91. Things Dwarfs Hate. No, Lancelot shook his head, admitting he knew nothing about those names. Haha. That's because I flattened all those places. Phil laughed heartily, clapping his hands with a face full of pride. Old Reep made a grand introducing gesture towards the goblin, giving Lancelot a "you get it now" look. Before the action starts, I certainly need to hide far away. Old Reep sighed. Now, let me introduce the distribution of guards and the patrol plans inside the fort. I have a map here. An hour later, the three of them came out of Old Reep's tavern, their minds crammed with information about Oasis Fort. The operation would begin the next night. Tonight, Lancelot would first familiarize the dwarfs with the environment, while Phil would deal with the goods they had brought and prepare some explosives. Although many demons possessed exceptional dark vision, escaping at night was still much easier than during the day, and there would be fewer mortals on the streets after dark. If it ultimately became necessary to use Phil's explosives, they could at least try to minimize casualties. Lancelot asked Phil how he was preparing explosives since he hadn't brought any dynamite. Phil rattled off more than a dozen names, all common household items. The goblin claimed that with the right techniques and purification, they could all be turned into ingredients for explosives. The plan was for Lancelot, Paladin, and Bruto to enter the succubus palace to find the cross pickaxe, while Phil and four dwarfs disguised as guards would loiter nearby. Once the target was acquired, Lancelot would use a small device given by Phil to signal him, and the goblin would immediately detonate the pre-placed bomb, blowing a huge hole in the succubus palace. But this big hole wasn't for Lancelot to escape, it was to create an atmosphere of panic. Then, they just needed to follow the fleeing crowd, casually exiting the succubus palace. Of course, this was the best-case scenario. If a battle occurred, the four dwarf warriors would need to provide reinforcements. However, Lancelot indicated his confidence in fighting his way out. The dwarfs would just need to meet him at the entrance, and it was crucial not to expose themselves too early. If, after leaving the succubus palace, the Oasis Fort's patrol was already alarmed, then they would have to rely on Phil. The goblin would have preemptively filled a road with remote-controlled bombs, blowing up any enemies following them to the skies. Eventually, they would find a sewer at the end of the road to completely lose the guards. Accompanied by several dwarf warriors, Phil sold the iron ingots they had transported, then pretended to buy some mining supplies needed by Twin Bridges town and swaggered back to their lodging yard. These goods were naturally the materials he used to make potent explosives. Upon returning to the yard, he instructed the dwarfs to move all the goods to his room, then he firmly closed the door and began his dangerous manufacturing work. Meanwhile, it was finally time for Lancelot to confront Bruto. Ah! What kind of cursed magic is this? Bruto let out a scream in front of the mirror in the room. Had Lancelot not set up a soundproof barrier in advance, he might have frightened the goblin, who was busy mixing explosives, into an accident. The mirror reflected a very attractive succubus, with a graceful figure, beautiful eyes, chestnut hair, and a fiery red beard. Lancelot and Paladin exchanged despairing looks. A bearded succubus was indeed too much of a shock. Lancelot felt a stinging pain in his eyes, like immersing his hands in the Stygian river for a minute and then immediately rubbing his eyes. Could the stubborn nature of dwarfs be so resilient that even transformed into a succubus, their beards stubbornly remained on their chins? If one were to list the 10 things the meticulous and humorless dwarf race despised most, magic, demons, and provocative clothing would certainly be top-ranking, and now these 3 things were all happening to Bruto at once, plus the gender-altering effect that kept the beard intact. But I must say, the succubi here look much prettier. Lancelot and Paladin's expressions turned horrified. A succubus should look like this. A deep, seductive voice rang out as Bruto, transformed into a succubus, adjusted his stance in front of the mirror, admiring his graceful body. He glanced at the two, who stood like statues beside him. Such a wonderful thing, and you didn't tell me about it sooner. Do you really see me as such an old-fashioned person? I was wrong. Lancelot sincerely apologized. I know you think you look great now, but for the sake of our mission, I'm afraid we still need some disguise. How about a masked kerchief? Paladin suggested. It would cover the beard and add a sense of mystery. But a succubus should look like this. The dwarf emphasized discontentedly, but still took the kerchief, wrapping it around starting from his nose, leaving only his eyes visible. Much better, Lancelot nodded, pleased that the situation was resolved in such a strange way. Let's go, didn't we say we need to get familiar with the surroundings tonight? Bruto walked towards the door enthusiastically, only to be pulled back by Paladin. Aren't you forgetting something? He pointed at Bruto's fingers. What's wrong? Bruto looked at Paladin, puzzled, but then understood the scholar's hint. Shouldn't we all wear the rings when we go out? That way, no one will recognize us. A succubus, such demons are very noticeable on the streets, Paladin patiently explained. If you can't flirt very proficiently with those who approach you, you'll quickly be found out. But Tajana wouldn't be like that. Explore more stories with Empire. Tajana's identity is different, she is the Lord of Twin Bridges town. Besides, she has killed quite a few careless folks before. Do you want the guards to think you are such a special succubus too? Alright, fine. Bruto reluctantly removed the ring, and with a flash of magical light, he transformed back into the dwarf. But his complexion suddenly changed, and he clutched his chest, stumbling backward several steps. Are you all right? Lancelot rushed to support him, asking with concern. What was I thinking just now? How could I have such strange thoughts? The dwarf looked dazedly at the air, seemingly both confused and frightened by his recent transformation. You weren't charmed by yourself, were you? Lancelot incredulously asked, blurting out. Exactly. It must be that. Paladin clapped his hands together. The power of charm must come from Tajana's hair. Although the dwarf had seen succubi many times before, he never felt anything due to his beard. It's only now that he saw a succubus fitting their aesthetic for the first time that he was charmed. Lancelot shook his head, still remembering the stun he felt when he first put on the transformation ring and saw himself as a succubus in the mirror. Let's go, we've already delayed too long. Chapter 92. That night, Lancelot spent 3 hours touring Oasis Fort with Bruto and 4 dwarf sanctuary guards. By the time the dwarves finally went to rest, everyone was clear on the details of the plan, and the map of the entire Oasis Fort was firmly imprinted in their minds. In the middle of the night, Lancelot accompanied Phil back to the streets, placing hundreds of large and small, ordinary-looking iron spheres along the predetermined retreat route. Fortunately, they had the dimensional bag, otherwise they would have had to run back and forth several times, which could have led to them being discovered by patrolling guards. During the entire day that followed, Lancelot stayed in his room practicing meditation and chi cultivation, getting himself into the best possible condition. The others rested as well, because the coming night was likely to be very long. As the powerless ruby sun hurriedly sank below the horizon, Lancelot and his party began their move. The guards at the entrance of the succubus palace were 2 strong and ugly 2-headed giants. The stupidity of these creatures was directly proportional to the stench emanating from them, offering no resistance to the transformed Lancelot and his party, allowing them straight in. Welcome, welcome. Esteemed guests, please come in. Just as they entered the succubus palace, they were immediately greeted by an enthusiastically welcoming succubus maid dressed as a servant. Compared to an average succubus, the servant's outfit was quite conservative, but Lancelot and his 3 companions were also clad in thick cloaks, which not only hid their transformed bodies and beards, but also concealed the fact that they were fully armed. Moreover, perhaps due to the powerful force contained in the hair provided by Tajana, their appearances post-transformation were stunning even by succubus standards. So, like Bruto, all 3 wore veils over their faces to avoid unnecessary trouble and prevent anyone from disregarding their succubus identity. My name is Daryl, may I ask how I should address our guests? I am Lansna, this is Carolinda and Brutolia. Lancelot, walking at the forefront, replied very naturally. Under the effect of the ice heart technique, he managed to keep his face expressionless no matter what happened, making him the best choice for negotiations. Welcome, please come this way. Daryl led them through a corridor lined with soft mats and heavy drapes. Is this your first time visiting our succubus palace? Continue your adventure with Empire. The name of the succubus palace has crossed the shattered mountain range and reached far to the south, Lancelot vaguely answered, to avoid exposure in an unknown area. Hee, really? But you'll soon find that, no matter what the rumors say, this place is 10 times better. The succubus maid laughed lightly, leading them into a hall that resembled a theatre. The entire hall was painted gold, a likely testament to the personal taste of its owner. At the front was a huge stage with deep purple curtains that had yet to be drawn. The center featured dining round tables surrounded by comfortable beds and sofas. Statues of male figures stood on both sides, the sculptor having accurately reproduced every detail of the body with slight exaggerations in certain areas. You must have heard about our succubus palace's highly acclaimed cuisine. Daryl guided them to a round table. Would you like to taste some food first, before enjoying the supportive performance? Oh look, the show is just about to start. Lancelot turned to look at the stage as it began to make noise, watching as the curtains slowly opened to reveal a diverse group of males from various races: humans, elves, dwarves, half-orcs, and even a few gnomes and goblins. These distinctly muscled men were clad in only 2 articles of clothing, the larger of which was a necktie around their necks. Mesmerizing music arose from nowhere, and the people on the stage began to contort their bodies. Lancelot turned his face away. Although he could suppress his heartbeat and breath without any fluctuation, he truly couldn't force himself to endure the torment of such a scene any longer. "Don't be shy, dear," the succubus maid said with a wicked smile. "How about a serving of griddled goblin brains? Paired with some red wine from the land of harmony." Many guests who tried it claimed it opened the door to a new world for them. "We are here for things more exquisite than goblin brains," Lancelot decided to cut straight to the point. "Bring us your finest body, and the most private room you have. Of course, we will make sure to satisfy you." Daryl suddenly realized something and hesitantly asked, "Do all 3 of you wish to be together?" "We only need one, the best one," Lancelot said as he pulled out a glittering ruby from his chest and briefly flaunted his spending power. Daryl reached out to grab the ruby, but Lancelot had already placed it back into his chest, giving her a reproachful look which forced the succubus maid to reluctantly withdraw her arm. "It appears you have all heard of our famously renowned priest," she revealed a knowing smile to Lancelot. "Normally, his rate is 1,000 gold coins for 3 hours, but since there are 3 of you, I'm afraid we'll have to charge triple the fee." "No problem," Lancelot nodded. "Then please follow me," she said. The succubus maid led them through a corridor outside the main hall, the opposite side of which featured tightly closed doors, between which were hung paintings depicting the queen of the succubus in fierce battle with various heroes, demons, and monsters. The corridors were also carpeted with soft mats, and curtains hung from the ceiling not only obstructed the view but also effectively absorbed the sounds emanating from the rooms behind the doors. But Lancelot had far superior hearing than an ordinary person. Those subtle sounds reached his ears, as clear as if the entwined bodies were right before his eyes, forcing him to silently recite the ice heart technique to suppress the fervor within him. From time to time, men would come towards them, stepping aside at the first sight of them to stand respectfully, yet they also stared at the 3 with a longing gaze, showcasing their muscles and subservience, hoping to be chosen for a shared pleasure. It was not chains that enslaved them, Lancelot sadly realized. These people were enslaved by their instincts, and Lancelot doubted any of them would want to leave even if they were given the choice of freedom. Their bodies might remain robust to please the succubus, but their souls would be gradually drained. When keeping them alive was no longer of any value, the demons had plenty of ways to continue exploiting their souls. Finally, they reached their destination and stopped in front of a grand door. Chapter 93. "This is our best suite." Daryl pushed open the door, leading the 3 into a bedroom filled with mirrors, ropes, and soft beds. Paladin and Bruto walked in first, their faces flushed as they took in the various facilities in the room, wisely keeping silent without making any comments. Just as Lancelot was about to enter, Daryl quietly pulled him aside. "It seems your 2 sisters are a bit restrained." Daryl's words caused a flicker of murderous intent in Lancelot's heart, and he was about to invoke the King Yun sword art to release his sword chi, but the succubus maid's next sentence dispelled his doubts. "Is it their first time?" Daryl's face broke into a wicked smile. "The first time is always special, especially with our star performer. He is a true priest of passion. There's no one more suitable than him." "That couldn't be better," Lancelot said vaguely. "Where is he?" No sooner had he spoken than the sound of chains rubbing against each other could be heard, and another succubus led in an elf dressed in a long robe. The elf looked very young, with the distinctively delicate features of the elves, pointy ears, pallid skin almost tilting towards blue, and light golden hair. Unlike the other tamed males, this elf had a mithril collar around his neck, which was attached to a thick chain. The other end of the chain was held in the hand of the succubus who had brought him, making him look more like a slave. His eyes were like 2 emeralds, filled with despair and helplessness, but upon seeing Lancelot, they flickered briefly then suddenly ignited with the light of hope. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Alamir. He's yours now." The succubus who brought him gave a slight flap of her wings and hooked the other end of the chain onto a hook in the ceiling of the room. The chain wasn't long. If the elf stood up straight, he could only move within a range of about 4 or 5 feet. Just in case, after all, he's a genuine priest, Daryl grinned at Lancelot, "and it's more exciting this way, isn't it?" "Very well, I think this should be sufficient." Lancelot took out several gemstones, we hope to be undisturbed for the time being. We'll leave when we've had enough fun, you can come clean up after 3 hours. No problem, I hope you enjoy yourselves. Darrell almost snatched the gemstones from Lancelot's hand, made a courtesy with the other succubus maid, turned, and exited the room, closing the door tightly behind her. The room fell into silence, and Lancelot silently cast a spell, forming an invisible energy field shrouding the room and completely isolating any sounds from inside and outside the room. Are you here to rescue me, friend of the elves? After a brief silence, the elf slave called Alamir spoke first. He used the elvish language, speaking directly to Lancelot who was still standing by the door. No, we did not know of your existence before, Lancelot naturally replied in elvish, then switched back to the common language. Who are you, and why did you think I was here to rescue you? Oh, I see. I noticed you carry the elves' blessing. Only a high priest can cast that divine art, and I thought. The elf shook his head in disappointment, then continued in the common language, but I guess you are not here for pleasure. My name is Alamir Silverleaf, a priest of the love goddess Shani. He tilted his head to the side, revealing an emblem on the back of his neck, one with the beautiful face of a human female with thick hair. Indeed, it is Shani's emblem, nodded Paladin, who was quite familiar with religious knowledge. But how could a priest of a righteous goddess end up in this place? Has she deviated from the path of Lady Flame, fallen due to indulgence in carnal pleasures? I have never strayed from the teachings of Lady Flame. Even after coming to this dreadful place and serving those insatiable succubi day after day, I have never neglected the requirements the goddess has for her priests. The elf replied angrily, then pointed to an empty corner of the room and uttered a word, Holy Flame. A fierce glow, like a flame, suddenly appeared where he pointed, but the elf let out a painful scream at the same time and collapsed to the ground, hesitant. Lancelot noticed that a collar on the elf's neck emitted a burst of energy, severely punishing the priest for daring to exercise divine arts on his own. Cough cough. Although it's only a low-level divine art trick, it is still a divine art, cough cough. Alamir Silverleaf managed a weak smile, you see, although demons and their lackeys never allow me to pray to the goddess, I have never deviated from her path, otherwise, I couldn't cast any divine arts. Are you all right? Paladin stepped forward to help the suffering elf and began to explain, I apologize for what I just said. I was merely curious, how did you end up in this place? There was a lady of high status within the church who fell in love with someone she shouldn't have, a male succubus, Alamir Silverleaf said bitterly. For the sake of this dangerous lover, she opened a portal directly to the bottomless abyss during the church's decadal banquet. The goddess's followers are not lacking in combatants, but no one expects to be ready for battle on such an occasion. It was an outright massacre. Explore more at Empire. With that, the elf closed his eyes in sorrow, as if by doing so, he could erase that terrible scene from his mind. Such things would never happen among us dwarves, Bruto crossed his arms, we never leave our armor and weapon out of reach. Ah, so you're a dwarf. Alamir Silverleaf nodded, I've been wondering what would happen if you took off that beautiful ring on your hand. The atmosphere became awkward again. At this moment, Lancelot stepped forward and put a hand on the elf's shoulder. Seeing the approach of the succubus, Alamir Silverleaf instinctively felt fear, but as he detected no hostility from Lancelot, he did not dodge and remained compliant. We must first confirm your identity, please relax. Lancelot's divine sense passed through his palm into Alamir Silverleaf's body, to carefully investigate whether he was truly an elf as he claimed and not a disguise created by magic like himself. Divine arts were indeed exclusive to priests, but from Tajana, he knew of a type of demon that could also achieve this. This terrifying demon, known as a succubus, by deceiving a group of good-hearted mortals into conducting a blasphemous ritual, could open a portal to the deepest furnaces of the abyss. The succubus would burn to ashes in the supernatural heat and then be reborn from those ashes as a succubus. It goes without saying that the deceived mortals who conducted the ritual would become the targets of the succubus's horrific suffering during its birth process. There is a belief that as demons directly born from desire, succubi do not experience the terrible suffering other demons go through during evolution. This leads them to act, in most cases, loosely and casually, even engaging in romantic affairs with creatures of completely opposing alignments, such as lawful or good, making them one of the few kinds of demons that prioritize pleasure over a desire for destruction. But a succubus would not do so. Chapter 94. In fact, although Mikanshut held the title of Queen of the Succubus, the succubi were more like her subjects, or as the queen herself would say, children. The true enforcers of her brutal rule over Shendiravir were her band of professional, ruthless, and highly efficient enforcers, the succubi. The 13 succubi at the top tier were known as the Glorious Sisters, publicly acknowledged as the Queen's royal choir, but in reality were the most cold-hearted special agents and assassins under her command. After all, many tasks were unsuitable for the playful succubi, while the succubi required much more patience when orchestrating various cunning schemes. In their true form, the succubi no longer possessed the astonishing beauty typical of succubi. They still had bodies similar to human females and appeared reasonably attractive at first glance, but a closer look would reveal abnormalities. Their faces resembled those of streetwalkers who had been in the business for over 50 years. What was once graceful wings were now no more than charred remains, replaced by several thick, slippery, nauseating tentacles protruding from their backs, with scorpion-like stingers at the ends. Unlike most succubi, the succubi were very competent warriors, and if forced into close combat, their claws and spikes were as sharp as swords. But their greatest pleasure still came from using their quasi-divine art abilities to disguise themselves as divine office members, infiltrate a true God's church, patiently accumulate reverence and power, and covertly convert real priests into devotees of some demon lord, a process that brought them immense fun. This disguise could deceive most detection and protective magics, but could not evade direct scrutiny by divine sense. As Lance swept his divine sense over the elf's body, Alamir's true condition clearly emerged in his mind, confirming that he indeed was an elf, with the only exception being an extraordinary talent in some aspect. Lancelot turned and nodded at Colin and Bruto, and the three of them simultaneously removed their transforming rings. "Wow," Alamir uttered, not particularly surprised. "My name is Lancelot, and I'm a knight. This is Scholar Colin and Dwarf Warrior Bruto, son of Berend," Lancelot introduced. "We can help you get out, but you'll have to assist us in retrieving something we desire." "What are you looking for?" The elf priest looked at Lancelot with skepticism, his gaze shifting to Bruto. "Let me guess, it wouldn't be that dwarf cross pickaxe, would it?" "Where is that pickaxe?" Bruto asked impatiently, leading to a helpless exchange of glances between Lancelot and Colin. "Right beneath our feet, in the slave's resting chamber," sighed Alamir. "I'm probably the person who's touched that pickaxe the most. I knew from early on it was no ordinary item." Lancelot placed his hand on the collar around Alamir's neck, preparing to unleash the sword aura of the King Yin sword art to free the elf priest from his shackles. "Don't move, I'll help you take this collar off." "Not yet." Unexpectedly, Alamir turned his head slightly away, declining Lancelot's offer. "First, tell me your original plan. Perhaps keeping this symbol of shame would be more helpful to your scheme." "Makes sense," Lancelot nodded. "Our original plan was to confirm the pickaxe's location from a senior slave and then utilize the succubus illusion technique to obtain the item. Our companions outside would then create some chaos, allowing us to take our leave amidst the confusion. So the next step is to fetch that pickaxe." Alamir nodded. "Across from this suite in the corridor is a secret door. Opening it reveals a stairway leading down to the slave's resting room, where the pickaxe you seek is kept. I can pretend to show you that item, but there are always at least 4 toad-like demons guarding it. How do you plan to walk away with the pickaxe?" "Ha! Berserk demons!" Bruto drew his new hammer. "I am an expert at dealing with these stinky brutes. Fighting there is a very bad idea." Alamir's words coincided with Lancelot's thoughts. "The area below is filled with traps and secret doors. The slightest delay, and you will be surrounded by enemy reinforcements, making escape impossible." "What state is the cross pickaxe in?" Colin asked. "I mean, is it locked up or tied down?" "No, it's placed in a transparent box made of crystal, right on the pedestal in the center of the rest area. Any slave can pick it up when needed to continue serving the insatiable succubi, but taking it away would be quite tricky as several eyes would immediately notice something missing from the box." "This might not be so complicated," Colin thought aloud. "I can create an illusion, a simple trick, but it's hard to detect anything amiss through a layer of transparent crystal. The illusion can last for 1 minute, which should be enough for us to slip out. We can signal Phil to act at that moment," proposed Colin. "That should briefly distract the guards. Then I'll just stash the cross pickaxe in this dimensional bag." Lancelot slapped the small pouch on his belt. "Great," Bruto clapped his hands. "This plan sounds solid." Lancelot nodded, pondering if there were any slips in the plan. The worst case would be that they had to fight their way out, but from the auras he had sensed along the way, if he really wanted to leave, he doubted anyone here could stop him. However, going out would surely mean facing swarms of guards, and if it did come to that, he could only hope Repedant exaggerated about the destructive powers of the goblins. "Let's wait for now," said Lancelot, "it might not be reasonable if the time is too short." "Indeed, you are my first guests today," the elf priest said with a wry face. "Normally, I wouldn't need the cross pickaxe's help until the third guest arrived. But today, there are 3 of you, so maybe waiting an hour will be sufficient. Continue your adventure at Empire." "Ha, elf stamina doesn't seem very good," Bruto said with a mischievous grin. "The third one already needs the help of a magical item. The doctrine of the goddess requires I perform an act of love every day, and try to awaken love in someone's heart with each new day. At least once a day, I must respond to love," Alamir explained with some embarrassment. "I always do my best to fulfill those succubi's desires. It's not easy, as it always takes a full 3 hours to barely satisfy a customer." It was then that Bruto realized Alamir was catering to succubi. It was astonishing that he, with his mortal body, could satisfy a succubus and, after dealing with one, could continue to satisfy a second, fighting for 6 consecutive hours. Sorry, I almost forgot where we are." Bruto scratched his head. The dwarves always quick to acknowledge their mistakes, so, do you have any tips? "Don't get me wrong, I'm just asking for a friend." Chapter 95. Lancelot realized that he had his ears perked up, fully attentive to what the elves were about to say. Shani's church does indeed teach some techniques." Alamir's expression made it clear that he was not proud of this. "After that, it's a lot of practice. Succubuses have very sensitive bodies, and it's not too difficult to figure out what they like, but obviously, you need good stamina." The human knight silently cursed in his heart. He must bring this guy back, and when there's time, learn a thing or two from him. This was his current thought. Of course, Lancelot had fantasized about what would happen with Tajana once all those beautiful scenarios had been realized, but he actually wasn't very confident about it. After all, at their core, succubi were born from mankind's most primal, wildest desires, naturally possessing the highest standards in matters of men and women. He shook his head, casting aside those stray thoughts from his mind. He glanced again at the collar around the elf's neck, and suddenly felt that perhaps he could do something about it. "Is it this collar that's preventing you from using your divine arts?" he asked. "Maybe I can disable it." Hope appeared on Alamir's face, and he nodded vigorously, indicating that it was indeed so. Lancelot walked over and placed his hand on the mithril collar. At the chi refinement realm, he couldn't project his divine sense from afar and could only probe the condition of creatures and objects through direct contact. He discovered an intricate magic circuit within the collar, the details of which required advanced magical knowledge that the occasional tidbits picked up from Paladin were not enough to comprehend. But he didn't need to understand the workings of this magical item. Lancelot just needed to destroy it. The human knight carefully began to circulate his chi, using only a tiny bit of his most purified innate true chi. The innate true chi, like a little brush, wiped the delicately structured interior of the mithril collar into a meaningless blank slate. Alamir immediately sensed an invisible restraint disappear, and with trembling hands, he cast a holy fire technique again. The muscles on his neck instinctively tensed, fearing the usual burst of intense pain. The searing light descended like flames, but he stood there just fine, and nothing happened. "You must be sent by the goddess to save me, words can't express my gratitude, friend." He bowed deeply to Lancelot, the last words spoken in the language of the elves. "I guess he's going to be one of us from now on," Bruto whispered to Paladin. "Why? Continue reading at Empire. Haven't you noticed our common trait? You, me, this delicious-smelling elf, we've all been saved by Lancelot." "Indeed, Sir Lancelot is a good man," Paladin sighed. "Meeting him has truly been our luck." By then, Alamir had run over to a corner of the room, where there was a large bathtub. The elf pulled a handle, and immediately from a copper pipe flowed steaming bath water. What are you doing?" Bruto asked the elf curiously. "Are you going to take a bath?" "I suppose so. Bathing is part of the ritual required to pray to the goddess, and since we have an hour left, I want to try and see if I can restore some divine arts." With only men present, Alamir quickly stripped down to just his underwear, then immersed himself in the water. "It's been a long time since I prayed to her. The collar and guards prevented me from doing so, and now isn't even the proper time for prayer, but I hope the goddess still wishes to hear my voice." Upon hearing this, the others also found places to sit down. Paladin and Bruto whispered about some interesting things they had seen in the succubus palace, while Lancelot sat cross-legged to meditate, entering a state of spiritual sight, alert to any abnormalities around them. Alamir first completed his bath with a devotional heart, then carefully tidied his hair, donned his robe, and made sure he looked as beautiful and elegant as possible. After somewhat awkwardly finishing the preparations for prayer, he began to softly recite the prayers he had only been able to silently read in his mind for the past decade. At first, Lancelot didn't notice any changes, but his spirit perception detected a slight abnormality in the surroundings. This abnormality was hard to describe. If not for the heightened senses under his meditation and spiritual sight, he wouldn't have noticed this change at all. Suddenly, a pink spiritual light appeared out of nowhere, enveloping the praying elf. The light carried a sacred aura similar to the one Moradin had when blessing the whip for Lancelot, only much gentler and more soothing, like a lover's caress. Tears flowed from Alamir's tightly closed eyes as he appeared very happy, yet he continued with the prayers from his mouth. "What's happening?" Bruto nudged Paladin with his elbow and turned back to see the scholar with his mouth wide open in astonishment. "That is a sign of the deity's favor to a believer," Paladin explained. "Perhaps the Lady of the Flame is pleased with his constant faith." The red light gradually faded, but the energy it contained slowly merged into the elf's body. Lancelot felt that it wasn't just the elf's body that had healed, his soul, which had been heavily strained, seemed to have been repaired as well. Finally, Alamir ended his prayer, stood up with his eyes open, giving off a refreshed aura. Seeing everyone looking curiously at him, the elf gave a slight smile. He tore a small piece of white cloth from the robe placed beside him, bowed his head to softly utter a spell, and then threw the white cloth in his hand outwards. The white cloth quickly turned into 3 larger illusions in mid-air, and immediately flew towards Lancelot and the others. Feeling the nature of the power contained in the magic, Lancelot didn't dodge, but instead stood curiously in place. The illusions took on the form of cloaks, gently wrapping around them before vanishing from sight. Lancelot felt his life force had become slightly more vigorous, and though the increase wasn't large, it was still a decent blessing. Divine art. "This is aid. Have your divine arts been restored?" Paladin asked excitedly, for his own physique was relatively weak, and the strengthening effect of the divine arts was much more apparent on him than on Lancelot and Bruto. "Yes, I never imagined the goddess would directly respond to my prayer and even bestow upon me many new divine arts, including even the resurrection art." Alamir happily replied, then his face betrayed a slightly embarrassed expression. "My domain of divine arts is life, so I am not skilled in attack, but I can use divine arts to quickly heal any injuries you incur. If a battle occurs later, could you try your best to protect me?" "No problem, that's a very reasonable tactic." Lancelot nodded and then stood up. "It's about time, let's get moving." Chapter 96. Continue reading at Empire. Upon hearing this, everyone promptly put their transformation rings back on, and Alamir looked at the transformed group with appreciative eyes, his face brimming with a sincere smile. Shania taught her followers to appreciate all beautiful things and creatures, and the succubus were among the most beautiful creatures in the multiverse. That was until the elves saw what Bruto looked like after his transformation. The sight of this bearded succubus shocked the elves so much that their face turned pale and they promptly sat down on the ground with a thump. Lancelot chuckled inwardly, noticing that Alamir was still in a state of shock, and he motioned for Bruto to quickly wrap his scarf around. "What's the matter? You see, he's completely mesmerized by me," Bruto reluctantly said, even throwing a flirtatious wink at the elf on the ground. "Just wrap it." Lancelot couldn't stand the gesture and pressed the scarf onto Bruto's face himself, feeling that if he were any slower, the priest on the ground might even begin to question their faith. As Bruto's red beard was covered by the scarf, Alamir finally came back to his senses. He breathed heavily, as if he had forgotten to breathe the whole time. "From a dwarf's perspective, we guys without beards are the real monsters," Paladin consoled. "I believe the Lady of Fire can understand that dwarves have their own standards of what is beautiful." "Thank you, I understand." The elf priest staggered to his feet, his face still pale. Seeing that others were armed, he pulled a chair over and with a bit of force, broke off a chair leg. "You're pretty strong, hey," Brutolia commented. "Not hard to guess why," Alamir shrugged, stuffing the chair leg into his robe. "I'll rely on this until I find a proper weapon, just in case." "Definitely better than nothing," Lancelot shrugged and opened the door. The elf priest handed the chain connected to a collar to Lancelot, feigning exhaustion, and led the way out, with the 3 of Lancelot following close behind. The corridor outside the room was temporarily empty. Alamir looked around and then quickly walked to the opposite side of the corridor, pressed a discreet bulge on the wall, and immediately part of the wall silently slid open, revealing a staircase spiraling downward. The elf priest took the lead down the staircase, followed closely by the 3 succubi. The steps were quite narrow, but there were gemstones glowing on the walls, providing illumination for those mortals who lacked night vision abilities traveling in this passage. Even without these light sources, the 4 people currently in the passage wouldn't have much of a problem, because elves and dwarves inherently possessed night vision abilities, and Paladin had also acquired the demon's night vision abilities after transforming into a succubus. Even if he took off the ring, he had a vial of night vision potion on his belt to help him cope with the darkness. The passage was not long, and the group quickly descended to the first basement level of the succubus palace, where the exit of the passage was guarded by 2 two-headed giants. These guards clearly recognized the elf and let him pass straight away, but they stopped the 3 succubi following the elf, puzzled by their appearance. "You shouldn't be here," one of the giants' left head spoke up, while the right head immediately countered, "Guests can go wherever they want. It's none of your business." "But guests never come here. Someone was just here last month." "You idiot." Lancelot was astonished as he watched this rare scene, a creature with more than one head arguing with itself. It made him wonder what would happen if he chopped off one head but kept the other. Another, slightly skinnier, 2-headed giant seemed equally foolish. It hesitated, looking at its partner, as if waiting for both heads to agree. Taking a risk, Lancelot lowered his mask to reveal his beautifully transformed face. "We just want to have a look. There shouldn't be any problems, right?" he said, smiling at the 4 heads and waving the shackles in his hand. The 2 two-headed giants paused, a silly smile spreading across their faces as they nodded vigorously and drool dripped from their mouths. Bruto, surprised at how easily the giants were persuaded, widened his eyes. He wanted to take off his mask and charm the giants too, but was quickly stopped by Paladin's swift intervention. With a gentle push, Lancelot nudged aside the massive club blocking their way and walked past. The burning gaze of the 2-headed giants closely followed Lancelot, making him feel like a thorn in his side until he disappeared into another room together with the elves, vanishing from the giant's view. "Very effective," Paladin briefly remarked. Lancelot shrugged, hiding embarrassment that seemed to come from nowhere. They entered a hall resembling a dungeon. On either side were rooms sealed with iron doors, containing groups of slaves chained and shackled. Several foul-smelling berserk demons here acted as guards. The guards noticed the elves and the succubus behind them immediately, but they just glanced at Alanis and then looked away, indicating that the collars and shackles had served their purpose. Just then, the ground suddenly shook, and a loud noise came from above, causing the berserk demons to jump up and look at the ceiling uncertainly. Bruto and Paladin immediately looked at Lancelot with questioning eyes, but he shook his head gently, indicating that the noise wasn't caused by Phil, at least not at his request. However, a sense of unease still emerged in his heart. There might have been an unexpected disturbance outside, and it was best to get out of there quickly. He quietly picked up his pace, urging the elves to lead them into the next room. "Alamir? What are you doing here?" a familiar voice called out. Lancelot looked up to see that the room was a kitchen, and speaking was Daryl, the succubus maid who had welcomed them earlier. She led several goblin servers carrying trays and was about to exit through another door. "I need to recover," the elf priest said calmly, turning to signal the others following him including Lancelot. "The 3 guests insisted on accompanying me." "He's indeed great, but he doesn't seem as miraculous as you described." "He couldn't last even an hour," Lancelot complained, displeased. "Rest assured, guests. We have magical items that can quickly revitalize these men," Daryl said, smiling apologetically at Lancelot, but then she turned and fiercely told the elf priest, "Get going, and put on your best performance. If the guests are even slightly dissatisfied, I'll force-feed you with healing potion and flay you myself." Chapter 97. Daryl had finished scolding and once more saluted Lancelot before leaving with the goblins who were carrying the plates. "Maybe we shouldn't have rejected that succubus's offer so directly," Bruto sniffed, "the food on those plates really smelled good." "Alamir, are you all right?" a delicate voice sounded, and only then did everyone notice that there was still someone else in the room. At first glance, she could easily be mistaken for an underage human girl, but a closer look revealed that she was a halfling. She had pink skin and brown hair, along with a cute doll-like face. She wore a tall chef's hat, yet her true height was apparent, probably only 3 feet, less than half of Lancelot's. The room's air was filled with the scent of food, stewed meat, melons and fruits, cakes, and desserts. These conflicting odors mingled together but still smelled very good, stirring one's appetite irresistibly. It seemed she was the one who had made the tasty dishes that Darryl had strongly recommended, but Lancelot still noticed the shackles on the halfling's ankles, linked by a chain to an iron ball bigger than Bruto's head, suggesting that this little one had likely made numerous escape attempts. The chef looked fearfully at the three figures of Lancelot, seemingly very afraid of the succubus, but still mustered the courage to say to Alamir. Read exclusive adventures at Empire. I have some cheese tarts here that might make you feel a bit better. Thank you, Kola, I'm fine, Alamir said with a smile to the halfling, but Lancelot, standing behind him, saw that the elf's back was soaked from the confrontation with Darryl. Cheese tarts sound amazing, get us one, the gluttonous Bruto suddenly spoke up, sounding very enthusiastic. Lancelot's facial muscles twitched involuntarily. Bruto must be one of the few dwarves exceptionally interested in food, and here he was, blurted out his request so casually in this tense situation. Ah, no problem. The halfling known as Kola was slightly taken aback, hurriedly responding. She crouched down to look for something, and from Lancelot's perspective, all he could see was her tall chef's hat moving back and forth behind the cooking range. The halfling chef soon stood up again, with a tray in her hand that held 6 freshly baked golden cheese tarts, emitting an enticing aroma. These were supposed to be charged for. Kola tried to appear as serious as possible, but for Alamir's sake, these are on the house. Bruto, unable to wait, grabbed one and was about to pull down his face cloth and toss it into his mouth when he finally remembered something and turned his back. Thank you, Kola. Your cooking is the best I've ever seen, Alamir thanked the halfling chef first, then reached for one as well. Lancelot was also quite curious about the cheese tarts in front of him, but he was not about to let his guard down. He first used divine sense to check the tarts and then surreptitiously performed 2 spells to detect poison. After confirming the food was safe, he picked up a tart and put it in his mouth. By Ogma above, this is unbelievable. Colin's voice of marvel came from behind, and Lancelot silently agreed with him wholeheartedly. The cheese tart filling at the entrance was soft and sweet, with an extremely delicate texture. The intense fragrance of cheese and eggs wafted over, and the outer crust was crispy to perfection, still carrying that distinct aroma of being freshly baked, which beautifully neutralized the sweetness of the filling, making one unknowingly eat an entire cheese tart. Bruto, with swift hands, directly reached out and grabbed the last one left on the plate. The halfling chef chuckled happily, looking very pleased. Lancelot, can we? Bruto nudged Lancelot, his eyes full of hopeful expression, while Alamir also looked at him full of hope. It seemed that passing by this kitchen was mostly the elf priest's doing on purpose, but Lancelot could understand Alamir's little scheme. If he were in his shoes, having the chance to escape this demon cave, he would also want his friend to come along, at least to give it a try. However, even if he were willing, trying to take the halfling out would probably not be an easy task. Can she be trusted? Lancelot asked, staring intently into Alamir's eyes. She has a heart of gold, and although she has suffered various injustices, she still chooses to treat everyone kindly, Alamir said, not averting his gaze from Lancelot. She is my only friend here, and I certainly trust her. Lancelot nodded, and this gesture made the elf show a genuine smile, convincing Lancelot that he had made the correct decision. What are you guys talking about? The halfling chef asked, confused by their seemingly inexplicable conversation, and suddenly as if he understood something. Is someone going to redeem you, Alamir? The word redeem almost caused the elf priest to bite her tongue, while Bruto let out a string of barbell-like laughter on the side. Kola, are you still planning to escape from this place? Alamir looked at Kola. I'm about to leave this damned place. What are you rambling about? The elf's words made the halfling turn pale, her nervousness apparent as she glanced at the 3 succubi standing to the side. She quickly pulled an apple pie from underneath her and stuffed it into Alamir's mouth, trying to stop the elf from saying more. No, you got it wrong, oh, my goodness, this apple pie is really delicious, Alamir mumbled unclearly with food suddenly stuffed in her mouth, unwilling to spit out the delectable treat, she could only hurriedly swallow faster. Eat more slowly, don't choke, Lancelot patted Alamir's back and then smiled at the halfling, cover your mouth first, and make sure it's tight. Kola did as told, and Lancelot closed his eyes, feeling the atmosphere around to ensure no one was approaching the room. He then took off his transformation ring. The halfling's scream from within her mouth stifled by her hand came out as a muffled groan. Lancelot smiled at her, then put the ring back on. A transformation ring? You relied on this to sneak inside. Cola stared in amazement at Lancelot's finger, suddenly smiling as if she had figured everything out. I get it now, you're here to rescue Alamir. We're here for the cross pickaxe in the rest room, it might be a holy relic of the dwarf race. Lancelot shook his head. Alamir will help us get that item, in exchange, we will take her out. Do you want to come along? Thank you, Alamir, for still thinking of me when such a chance has appeared. The halfling gratefully looked at the elf, but she shook her head, lifting her leg, and jingling the shackles on her ankle. But I can't go with you, I would just be a burden to you. Don't be too quick to refuse, my diminutive friend, you don't take up much space, the elf priest said with a smile. I have a good place for you to hide, but you might have to take a nap first. Chapter 98. Where exactly is this place you're speaking of? Kola looked at Alamir with a skeptical gaze. I may be a little short, but I definitely can't hide inside your robe. No, not inside my robe. Alamir laughed. When I was praying to the goddess just now, she gifted me a new spell, the Feign Death technique. With this magic, you'll be able to stay inside the dimensional bag. Sir Lancelot, your dimensional bag should be able to fit my petite friend here, right? No problem there, Lancelot asked with curiosity, but are you sure this Feign Death technique can keep her safely in the dimensional bag? At the moment, his dimensional bag was mainly occupied by the giant sword glacier and some gemstones, while his real wealth was actually inside his spiritual world. It should work. Paladin, who was well informed, spoke up. I can cast that spell too. It makes the recipient's heartbeat and breathing stop, just like they are dead, lasting for 1 hour. During that time, her body will be indistinguishable from a corpse. Sounds pretty interesting, the halfling said, eyes glinting with hope, but still a bit afraid. What happens if the spell fails? It won't just kill me, will it? Could you have a little faith in me? The elf priest responded with a cry laugh. And I'm also a priest, you know. If it fails, I have the resurrection art to bring you back to life. Stay updated through Empire. It must be within 1 minute of death, Paladin added. Better make a decision fast, Lancelot prompted, we've delayed for too long already. All right, go ahead, elf, the halfling closed her eyes. I knew my life of adventure wouldn't end as a cook. Considering all the cakes you've eaten, don't screw this up. Upon hearing this, the elf priest didn't delay any longer. He muttered a spell in a low voice, and soon a purple light gathered in his hands. Then, reaching out, he gently patted Kola on the shoulder. The halfling's eyes rolled back, and she collapsed straight down. She looks completely dead, Bruto said uncertainly, should we consider this a success? Lancelot stepped forward, took Kola's hand, and extended his divine sense to check the halfling's body. At first glance, it did look like a corpse frighteningly fresh, yet seemingly dead for a long time. From this perspective, it was an anomaly itself. But as his divine sense scanned every inch, he discovered a powerful life force at the corpse's heart, condensed into a tiny point by the mysterious magical power. If he hadn't been aware of the spell's effects beforehand, he definitely wouldn't have noticed it. It worked, he confirmed with a nod. Magic is truly terrifying, Bruto shrugged his shoulders. Let it be known, no matter what the circumstances, never use this spell on me. Don't be so absolute, Paladin shook his head. The Feign Death technique can temporarily halt any toxin and injury from taking effect. When we need to retreat and someone is severely injured, this spell can prevent the wounded from becoming a burden to the team. Would you still refuse it then? It can be used that way. Bruto looked astonished, reluctantly responding, if things really got to that point, it wouldn't be impossible. This is the proper use of magic, Paladin said, shaking his head, not like those fools who only know how to throw fireballs in any situation. While the two were discussing on the side, Lancelot did not stop working. A greenish sword aura shot out from his palm and began to cut through the shackles on Kola's ankles. This was a divine skill he had acquired through cultivating the King Yin sword art, which allowed him to release sword aura with his bare hands and, when combined with a weapon, could cover the entire blade to make it sharper. It could even extend beyond the tip of the blade to increase the attack range. However, since he had only just begun to learn the King Yin sword art, he could barely cover a great sword like the giant sword glacier with sword aura. Extending the sword aura would require him to use innate true chi and could only last for a very short duration. Under the cutting of the greenish sword aura, the iron shackles fell apart as easily as rotten wood. Upon witnessing Lancelot's technique, The elf priest's eyes widened in astonishment, while Bruto and Paladin were already used to such sights. "Don't be surprised, it's just the power that comes from the magician bloodline," Bruto shrugged nonchalantly. "My brother has many more tricks up his sleeve." But Lancelot was not entirely satisfied. As the King Yin sword art was a cultivation technique of the wood attribute, it seemed not very effective when cutting metal, and it might even be less effective than the 5 elements attribute less gathering chi slash, which frustrated him a bit. He was worrying too much, though. The King Yin sword art, personally improved by the great Han Tianzun, was a top-tier cultivation technique that was only slightly suppressed when dealing with metal attribute materials. It was infinitely stronger than the gathering chi slash, a technique almost everyone in the realm of cultivation could perform. The current average power of the art was purely because Lancelot had only cultivated it to the first level. Furthermore, the King Yin sword art had many wonderful uses, it was merely that Lancelot's current level was too low to have mastered them yet. After cutting the shackles, Lancelot directly stuffed the corpse of the halfling into his dimensional bag. He glanced at the severed shackles and the large iron ball and took these items with him as well. While the disappearance of the person might only confuse the guards, if the cut instruments of punishment were left behind, even a fool like the two-headed giant would realize there had been a prison break. "All set," Lancelot said as he patted his hands and stood up, once again taking hold of Alamir's chains. Just then, the ground shook even more violently than before, accompanied by muffled cries. Above them, they heard a series of hurried footsteps that changed everyone's expressions. "Something must have gone wrong," Lancelot said urgently in a low voice, "we don't have time to delay. Follow me, we're almost at the resting room." Alamir pushed open another door, leading everyone quickly through it. Behind the door was a staircase descending deeper into the succubus palace's underground. After navigating the staircase, Lancelot and his group entered a small hall which seemed to be the resting room mentioned by the elves. Long couches were placed around casually, food and drinks were on tables against the wall, and his divine sense alerted him to a special magic item placed on a pedestal in the center of the room. It was the object of their quest. Lancelot quickly scanned the vicinity. In the hall, several male slaves wrapped in robes were looking up at the ceiling with uncertainty, seemingly frightened by the recent commotion. A few berserk demons, evidently the guards, were poised for battle. Upon hearing someone enter, they all turned their gaze, but when they recognized that it was Alamir, they looked away, joining the slaves in watching the dust fall from the ceiling above. Chapter 99. Several succubus maids were also in the corner, and they were equally unsettled by the recent commotion, currently huddled together and discussing something. One of the succubi looked up and saw Alamir. Her expression briefly stiffened before she sternly began. "Alamir! Why have you returned? And you brought guests here?" Instantly, the group of succubi turned their heads. They only glanced at Lancelot and the two wrapped in cloaks for a moment before their attention settled on the elf. Explore stories at Empire. The looks in the eyes of the succubi were very complex, with concern, disdain, but mostly, there was an unabashed desire. "I bet every succubus here has slept with an elf," Bruto murmured to Paladin, who nodded ever so slightly in agreement. "I need to recover," and the three distinguished guests insisted. The elf had just begun speaking when she was abruptly cut off by a gesture from the succubus. All right, do as you please. Do you know what happened above? What's with these strange vibrations?" "I'm not sure," Alamir shook her head, "everything was normal before we came down." While the succubus was talking with the elf, Lancelot had already quietly made his way to the center of the room, near a countertop, feigning curiosity as he surveyed the resting area. Paladin, who had been keeping an eye on Lancelot's movements, naturally understood the signal. Under the concealing folds of his large cloak, a palm-sized mini-scroll quietly unfolded, already primed with the spell Minor Illusion. On the countertop was a case made of crystal, inside which lay their target, a cross pickaxe, casually tossed with no particular care. Aside from the faint luminescent glow on its surface, the pickaxe didn't seem extraordinary at first glance. But Lancelot's spiritual sense told him that this item was far more special than it appeared. He reached into his bosom, touching a small orb, and with a bit of force, he crushed it into pieces. This small orb was the tool given to him by Phil for communication. The moment he crushed his, another orb would shatter simultaneously on Phil's side. Immediately after the orb was crushed, nothing happened. Externally, Lancelot maintained his composure, but internally, he was fully alert. Who knew what kind of commotion Phil could create, but he had to be ready to act in a mere instant. Yet, after almost 10 seconds passed with no occurrence, He had already been standing there for quite some time, and several people in the room were casting strange glances in his direction. Suddenly, a violent tremor far beyond Lancelot's expectations arrived, accompanied by a deafening boom. Everyone was knocked to the ground, and Lancelot also took the opportunity to dive onto the countertop, but quickly rolled back onto the floor. And the case on the countertop was now empty. Paladin's spell casting had also been interrupted by the unexpected shock. Fortunately, everyone was affected, and no one noticed Lancelot's actions. After recovering from the brief jolt, Paladin on the ground immediately activated the scroll, and only then did an illusion of the cross pickaxe appear in the box. Thankfully, aside from the four with ill intentions, no one noticed that the pickaxe had briefly vanished. The continuous booming overhead was still ongoing, and it seemed to be getting closer and closer to them. Lancelot's face suddenly changed, and he rolled violently to the side. There was a crack sound like that of breaking bones, and the ceiling of the small hall incredibly collapsed. A huge stone with a radius exceeding 3 feet, glowing red from heat, fell violently from above, smashing a large pit in the ground. The weight of this huge stone was at least 30 tons, and its surface was still burning with fierce flames, casting light on Lancelot's pale face. He had been in the abyss for some time now, but this was definitely the closest he'd come to death. If he stayed put just now, even with his foundation establishment, he probably would have been a goner. However, this also meant that the pedestal which originally held the cross pickaxe was shattered into pieces, crushed under the huge stone, conveniently providing cover for their movements. Everyone looked up to see what seemed to be an interrogation room upstairs, a naked man tied to a chair, with the succubus holding a whip standing behind him. From a certain part of the man's body, the interrogation didn't seem too painful. These two were just as shocked, looking at the people below as if Lancelot and his group had rudely interrupted their private game. Above the interrogation room was an even smaller hole. Peering through it revealed the great hall they had entered when they first came to the succubus palace, furnished with dining tables and a stage. Screams, roars of anger, and even excited growls came from above, chaotic and jumbled together. Lancelot was sure that something major must have happened at Oasis Fort. The plan was just to blast a hole through an unguarded segment of the outer wall of the succubus palace, at most collapsing an entire wall, certainly not including the boulder that almost claimed his life. "We're under attack. Come out and fight." While the people inside the room were still staring at each other, a hoarse and ferocious voice suddenly rose directly from the depths of their hearts. This was a high-ranked demon using its wide-range sensory ability to shout out to all the demons nearby. Lancelot was startled. What exactly had happened? He touched another small sphere in his pocket, assuring himself his worries were unfounded. That sphere was from Phil, meant to warn him in case their team encountered trouble. The other demons in the room jumped up, but their reactions varied. The succubi seemed panicked, flitting about like headless flies, not knowing what to do. Fighting was generally not the succubi's forte. They preferred to provoke jealousy-fueled conflicts among suitors. If fighting was inevitable, their tactic typically involved using their charm ability to control someone, having this temporary ally take a hit for them so they could flap their bat-like wings and take off. But the berserk demon guards let out excited roars, some even entering berserk state, casually tearing a nearby human slave to shreds as if just to vent their destructive impulses. These giant toads leapt straight out of the large hole in the ceiling, howling as they charged outward, as though fearing the fight would end too quickly, and they'd miss out. The remaining slaves were either foolishly standing still or smartly taking the chance to slip away. This chaos was a rare opportunity to escape, if not now, then when? Lancelot patted the confused Alamir to get his attention. "It's time we left." "Oh, yes, of course." The elf quickly regained his composure. "Follow me." He ran to the side of the room, next to a gargoyle statue, and pulled the entire sculpture backward. A secret door on the wall immediately opened up, leading to a rather spacious spiral staircase winding upwards. This staircase leads directly to the stage of the Great Hall. "Let's go this way." Chapter 100. Lancelot pulled out his hand half-sword Frost-slash from under his cloak and took the lead, running forward. As he passed Alamir, he swung his long sword, startling the elves. The plain sword blade struck the iron chain that was holding him, and to everyone's surprise, it cleanly cut through the chain as thick as a forearm, leaving only half a foot of chain still attached to the collar around the elf's neck. Alamir stared blankly at the smooth cut, until Bruto pushed him to snap out of it. Too much had happened today, and he found himself distracted several times. The elves shook their heads, disdainfully threw the chain that symbolized their enslavement aside, and quickly followed the 3 succubus who had already run into the passage, towards their freedom. The group quickly ran up the stairs, but halfway up, Lancelot and Bruto suddenly stopped, causing Paladin, who was right behind them, to bump into them. "What are you doing? This body really is hard to balance." The scholar muttered in dissatisfaction, but then noticed the odd expressions on Lancelot and Bruto's faces, staring intently at a nondescript spot on the outer wall of the passage. "Stay updated via Empire." "What's wrong, what's wrong?" Alamir also came up to look, following their gaze. "There's no secret door there, I'm quite sure." "Do you feel it?" Lancelot ignored the confused pair and asked Bruto directly. "Of course." Bruto answered excitedly, "It feels as clear as if there's an extra goblin in my trousers." "What did you feel? What is behind this wall?" Paladin was beginning to understand. "Gemstone. Gold." Lancelot and Bruto answered in unison, exchanging glances and smiling knowingly. "What are you talking about? The elves were getting anxious, let's hurry and escape from here." "Listen to me, Alamir." Lancelot turned to look at the elves, his face serious. "You've been enslaved for 10 years, right? It's time you received the compensation you deserve. I feel there's a large amount of gold behind this." Bruto excitedly slapped the wall. "The stone can't block our dwarf intuition, there's no mistake." Alamir and Paladin finally understood what the two meant, and the elves lowered their heads to recall the structure of the succubus palace, then suddenly realized. "Behind this? It must be the interior of the treasury." "Haha, I would have guessed it even without you saying," Bruto chuckled, pulling out his hammer. "Are you planning to rely on that?" Paladin looked at Bruto's hammer, worriedly asking, "Are you sure this isn't a load-bearing wall?" "I'm not sure, and I don't care either." Bruto shrugged, glancing at Paladin. "Do you care?" "No, I don't care either." Paladin stepped back 2 paces. "Go ahead. Don't be reckless, using that hammer. I'm afraid every mouse in the succubus palace will be shaken enough to know what you're up to." Lancelot cautioned, "Use your shield, the fin of that shark lizard has the effect of breaking through rock and soil." "Ha! I almost forgot, thanks for the reminder." Bruto pulled out a shield made from the back armor of a shark beast from beneath his robe, with its dorsal fins polished into the shape of a blade edge, flickering with a dim spiritual light in the dim setting, signaling the extraordinary nature of the object. He proudly displayed the shield to everyone around him and then pressed it tightly against his body as he smashed into the wall with great force. With a muffled boom, the entire wall he expected to fall did not collapse. In fact, apart from a bit of dust shaken off, the wall seemed unchanged. "Ah, it must be this transformation ring that's making my strength lesser." Bruto tried to cover his embarrassment as he reached to remove the ring on his hand. "Watch me change back and try again." "No, there's no need." Lancelot pointed at the wall. "Look over there." Following the direction he pointed, they finally noticed a deep crack on the wall. It had been made by the sharpened fin of the shield. "Don't smash any more, just use your shield to draw a door-sized square on the wall." Bruto, surprised, looked at his shield, shrugged his shoulders, and according to Lancelot's instructions, pressed the shield against the wall. The sharp fin, which belonged to the shark beast, sank into the stone wall's surface as easily as a bread knife into butter. Bruto moved the shield like a glass cutter, tracing a square shape on the wall. The dwarf then pushed against the cut area, but the wall remained immovable. He shook his head in resignation and spoke. "It won't budge, this wall is too thick. I'll take it from here." Lancelot stepped forward, starting with a soundproof barrier spell, then stood quietly in front of the square Bruto had cut, quietly beginning to gather his energy. The transforming ring only changed his physical appearance, his body's interior remained as that of a human. True Chi roared out of his dantian, rushing through his meridians like a flood, bringing infinite power to Lancelot's body. Succubus Lansna let out a delicate-sounding roar, her palms striking forward powerfully, hitting right inside the square Bruto had just traced. The wall emitted a sound like an explosion, and the impacted area sent out a visible airwave, forming a deep indentation but still stubbornly refusing to break open a passage to the treasury. Lancelot would not stop there, as his palms delivered one blow after another, like waves slamming against a rock, cracking sounds emerging continuously. Finally, after more than a dozen strikes from Lancelot, the wall groaned and collapsed with a crash, revealing a large hole before everyone. Alamir looked at Lancelot's superhuman strength with awe and was speechless. The wall had a thickness of more than 3 feet, and while the fin on Bruto's shield only made a cut less than 6 inches in depth, the rest of the wall had been forcefully shattered by Lancelot's tremendous strength. What further disconcerted him was that Lancelot was still in his succubus form. Over the past decade, he fought up close with succubi daily, so he had seen all sorts of states of these demons, but the sight of this succubus in a horse stance, continuously slamming the wall, was particularly jarring. But now, no one cared whether Lancelot damaged the image of succubi because everyone was blinded by the dazzling gold light. Behind the large hole was a room filled with treasures, with piles of gold coins nearly transforming it into a swimming pool of gold. Gemstones of every hue were scattered everywhere, and both luxurious and finely crafted artifacts were easily seen. Armors and treasured swords sparkled with a brilliance, as if shouting, "Hey! Look here! I'm a treasure! Quick, take me out of this forsaken place!" Chapter 101. Lancelot quickly took off the dimensional bag from his waist and tossed it on the ground, instructing crisply. "No more than 5 minutes, grab the valuable ones first, no gold. Hurry up!" Everyone cheered and rushed in frantically. Lancelot, relying on his sensitivity to spiritual energy, immediately picked out the gemstones equivalent to upper-grade spirit stones. Bruto's eyes turned red as he lunged at the most valuable jewels, while Alamir carefully placed the delicate artworks into his dimensional belt. Paladin was the only one who didn't scurry around the piles of gold like a dung beetle on the scent. He pulled out the necklace from around his neck, murmured a spell softly and activated the detect magic spell embedded in the necklace. In his eyes, the world initially lost its color rapidly, then the items containing magical power lit up one by one, emitting their own magic aura. Under the effect of detect magic, the caster could determine the type of magic by the color of the spiritual light and the strength of the magic by the intensity of the light. Read exclusive adventures at Empire. Magic was roughly divided into 8 arcane schools: energy sculpting, protection, curse, transformation, illusion technique, charm control, necromancers, and prophecy, with the corresponding spiritual lights being crimson, dark red, orange, light blue, deep green, deep blue, deep purple, and yellow-green respectively. The intensity of the light ranged from dim to blindingly bright, and it was said that the light from a divine artifact could even rival the midday sun. Paladin effortlessly identified several of the most powerful magical items, including a staff wrapped in dragon scales, a great sword that could sing, shoes that seemed alive, a helmet decorated with wings made of numerous small swords, a slippery snake-shaped belt which was nearly impossible to pick up, and various other peculiar outfits, all of which he stowed one by one into the dimensional bag. These treasures, earned with the lives and blood of slaves like Alamir, had lain quietly in the master's treasure room for many years. The 4 intruders took what they pleased and quickly filled the dimensional bag, even though they had only taken less than a tenth of the treasures in the room, of course, the most precious tenth. Lancelot pulled out his enormous giant sword Glacier, tossed the large iron ball he took earlier from a halfling cook's foot, successfully clearing a bit of space, but soon it was packed again. "That's about enough, don't crush our halfling friend," Lancelot cheerfully said. This loot was quite the haul, as he had found more than 20 gemstones of upper-grade spirit stone level, making his mood exceptionally good. "Oh, believe me, that's the death a halfling dreams of," Bruto laughed and replied, grabbing another handful of gemstones to stuff in the dimensional bag. Lancelot was about to say something more, but suddenly his expression changed, sensing a familiar magical fluctuation, the prelude to the teleportation magic that Tajana had used several times before. Without time to react further, the succubus knight swiftly picked up the giant sword Glacier that was planted on a pile of gold coins and slashed towards the area with the most intense magical fluctuations. Lancelot's action of striking at the air baffled everyone, but the next moment, no one was laughing anymore. An orange magic glow suddenly streaked through the empty air, and a nearly naked female figure appeared mid-air, her back adorned with several tentacles as thick as arms, and a beautifully scenic manner faintly visible behind her. It was indeed a succubus, and it seemed that Lancelot and his companions had likely triggered some unknown alarm, inadvertently drawing this guardian of the treasury to them. The greeting she received was the light of a sword swung by Lancelot. Despite being ambushed and just having escaped from teleportation, the succubus's tentacles met the great sword's edge with an unbelievable agility. With a booming sound, the just-appeared succubus was struck and sent flying. Although she managed to block temporarily with her tentacle's stinger, she sustained a fearful wound on her waist, but ultimately she avoided a fatal blow. "Despicable thieves!" The succubus roared in anger and pain, having been attacked by what turned out to be another succubus. She glanced around and immediately noticed many precious items were gone, and a large hole had unexpectedly appeared on the wall, fueling her fury even further. Lancelot didn't waste any words and charged directly at the succubus for close combat. While the succubus was exceptional in hand-to-hand combat, her incessant quasi-divine arts were the real trouble. Cowardly scum! Facing Lancelot's aggressive attacks, the succubus secretly marveled inside. Every succubus once desired power due to their detest of their intrinsic weakness as a succubus and hence chose to transform, yet, here was this succubus daring to engage her in melee combat. But with just a swipe of her claw colliding with Lancelot's incoming great sword, she knew her enemy was not a mere succubus. The weight of the great sword exceeded her expectations, its power overwhelming for her to handle. What was more mysterious was the eerie blue glow on the blade, causing a small notch to appear on her claw, as tough as mithril, which frightened her from intercepting his attacks any further. "I know who you are now," the succubus said as she skillfully dodged Lancelot's attacks using her agile movements, while her 4 lightning-fast tentacles continually slapped the sword, causing Lancelot's attacks to skew. "Take off your mask, Tajana." Lancelot maintained his rhythm of attacks and slightly shook his head, letting the face mask fall aside. It wouldn't be good to let Tajana take the blame if this enemy had some bizarre means of escaping, as it might lead the queen of the succubus's wrath to him instead. Compared to this, Lansna was indeed a more suitable scapegoat. "Humph, who is Tajana?" "Another succubus," Lancelot ostensibly asked while striking with his sword. "And who are you then, wanting to snatch the treasure we discovered here?" "I am Samantha, the enforcer of the 5th Execution Squad." The succubus screeched in rage. "Cease immediately, this all belongs to the majestic queen of the succubus." "Oh, that's too bad," Lancelot said impassively, as his swordplay suddenly changed. He had realized he could barely gain the upper hand in the fight against the succubus, yet he couldn't breach her tentacles' defenses. He could unleash his full strength without reserve, but if he couldn't ensure a one-strike kill and the enemy had some tricks up her sleeve, his teammates might be in danger. At that, he shifted his focus toward those tentacles as his targets. He raised his hands and executed a downward chop, seemingly no different from his previous moves, but only his right hand grasped the sword handle, while his left hand swiftly grasped the hilt of Frost Slash on his shoulder. Chapter 102. Another flash of sword light suddenly brightened, and the succubus, unguarded against this sudden change, was a bit slow to retract a tentacle, which Lancelot directly slashed off at the sharp end, causing her to scream in pain and leap backward abruptly. The combat had been too fierce just now, with Lancelot's wide and sweeping sword moves covering all the space within 7 feet of him, preventing Bruto from stepping forward to help. Paladin and Alamir also found it difficult to lock onto the target with their spells due to Lancelot's close entanglement with the enemy, fearing they might accidentally hurt their teammates and thus hesitated to cast. Now, as the succubus moved away in pain, the two immediately threw out the spells they had prepared for a long time. Although it was Paladin's first encounter with a succubus, he was familiar with such demons from legends. For well-known reasons, anything related to succubi was a hot research topic among scholars. He knew well that succubi possessed high spell resistance, and at his current level, the probability that his magic would be resisted was higher than 2/3, so instead of casting offensive spells at the succubus, he chose to cast enhancement spells on Lancelot. He unfurled a scroll and hurriedly recited a series of spells. Magic power was drawn by him through the magic net, flowing through the arcane runes on the scroll, which gently quivered as if ready to fly off the surface of the parchment at any moment. Paladin pointed his finger at Lancelot and uttered the last word of the spell, and suddenly, a blue light appeared out of nowhere above Lancelot and then surged into his body. This was a third circle haste spell, significantly enhancing the recipient's attack and movement speed. Paladin, seeing Lancelot's intent to engage the enemy, and aware of how dreadful the succubus was, hesitated not a moment to use his once daily capability of the third circle spell, casting the most suitable auxiliary spell for the situation. Add latest chapters at freehognovlo only. Alamir's approach was much more straightforward. As a priest of the domain of life, he had little combat experience. Moreover, his repertoire of offensive divine arts was quite limited, except for a zero-circle divine art common to all priests of good alignment, the Holy Fire Technique. Although it's called the Holy Fire Technique, it causes radiant damage, and most fiends from the lower planes are either completely immune to fire damage or highly resistant to it, but they cannot resist this type of damage. A novice priest's casting of Holy Fire Technique had about the same effect as swinging a longsword, while a top-tier priest summoning Holy Flame had power comparable to the legendary Holy Sword. The effect of the Holy Fire Technique depended on the priest's divine art ability, which in turn was sourced from the depth of the priest's faith in their deity. Mere verbal praise would not significantly enhance a priest's divine art ability. Of course, if shouted loud enough, it might indeed attract divine attention, but this might not always be beneficial. To obtain stronger divine art abilities, a priest must demonstrate long-term, physical commitment, striving to expand their deity's influence in the mortal realm. Methods include but aren't limited to, acting according to the deity's teachings, developing more followers, combating the deity's enemies, executing the deity's plans, etc. But fundamentally, the core purpose is always to make the deity's divine office more important and widespread across the multiverse, which directly impacts the deity's own divine power. In a sense, priests are like sales representatives. The greater the contributions a priest makes to their deity, the stronger their divine art abilities. However, priests have heartfelt devotion to the product they represent, be it a deity or an ideology, otherwise, they couldn't be priests at all. This notion might sound somewhat profane, but it is indeed the fact. Even deities have their limits, albeit these limits are far beyond what mortals can imagine. Deities cannot personally attend to everything, to promote, or defend, their faith, they must rely on mortal proxies, thus the relationship. Of course, from a pragmatic viewpoint, untested devotion isn't very reliable. Other than observing a follower's actual behavior, there aren't many good ways for deities to measure the steadfastness of faith. Alamir was certainly not a novice priest. In fact, during his 10 years as a slave in the succubus palace, his faith in the Lady of Love never wavered, and he consistently upheld the goddess's requirements to her followers in his daily work. This allowed his divine art abilities not only to remain strong but also to grow stronger. Upon regaining the opportunity to pray to the goddess, he was immediately granted a third circle divine art, a clear testament to his capabilities. A searing beam of light struck the unsuspecting succubus, eliciting another agonized scream from the demon. Priest! The succubus bellowed with rage. The quasi-divine abilities of this kind of demon enabled them to impersonate divine office holders, but it came with a vulnerability to divine arts, making the succubi particularly susceptible to influence from priests and holy warriors, laying their identities bare. But her troubles were not over yet. A rapidly spinning hammer, carrying immense force, hurtled toward her. Barely turning her head in time, the hammer grazed past her face and struck a large pile of gold coins, creating a delightful clinking sound as the coins collided. Although she wasn't hit directly, the left side of the succubus's face swelled as if she had been harshly slapped. Find adventures at Empire. What kind of damnable succubus uses a bloody hammer as a weapon? In the blink of an eye, this thought flashed through her mind, and she instinctively looked in the direction from which the hammer had come. Bruto, who had just completed his throw, hadn't yet managed to retract his arm when the cloth mask slipped from his face. The red-bearded face of the succubus was fully captured in her sight. In the heat of battle, her mind went through a brief, complete non-magical blank. Facing an opponent like Lancelot, even a momentary lapse could be fatal. The human knight, under the effect of a haste spell, instantly closed in on the succubus. Glacier and Frost Slash intersected, swinging horizontally and vertically at her. Thanks to the 4 tentacles growing from her back, the succubus propelled herself backwards in a defiance of common sense at the last moment, avoiding being cleaved in two. She flew backwards again, a deep gash from her left shoulder to her thigh, as copious amounts of blood sprayed into the air. Lancelot hadn't expected the succubus's agility to be of this caliber. His sure kill strike failed to eliminate his opponent, slowing his pursuit momentarily. The succubus was likewise a veteran in battle. The demon's constitution allowed her to ignore the excruciating pain of her grievous wounds, seizing this brief opportunity. Still airborne, she swiftly recited a spell and cast a life-saving healing spell on herself, then crashed into a small mountain of gold coins at the other end of the vault. Chapter 103. The succubus's wounds on her skin rapidly writhed, nearly healing the bone-deep gashes in an instant. However, a bright flash of holy fire technique immediately enveloped her, eliciting another infuriated, anguished scream. Desperate, she attempted to charge forward to take out the priest first. A light clawing would render him incapable of casting divine arts ever again, or she could use her once-a-day ability to dominance over humanoids, making the priest truly believe she was his best friend. Yet that sword-wielding succubus instantly closed in again, blocking all her escape routes. Damn it, how could a succubus move so fast? And what's with that bizarre armor she's wearing? Lancelot was quite the sight at this moment. His robe had long been torn away, revealing the exquisite armor beneath, looking every bit the part of a knightly succubus. In stark contrast with his slender frame was the weapon in Lancelot's hands. In his left hand was the 4-foot hand half-sword Frost Slash, while his right brandished the terrifying 7-foot giant sword Glacier. The two-handed weapons transformed into a metallic whirlwind, and its ferocious attacks left the succubus gasping for air. The succubus had a dozen powerful spells at her disposal, any one of them could have turned the tide of the battle. But Lancelot didn't give her the chance. She had already realized just how formidable this succubus was. A moment's distraction in battle would let that great sword deprive her of her combat abilities completely. Moreover, it wasn't just the terrifying strength and swift attacks of the opponent that troubled her. The succubus had detected something off with the weapons in Lancelot's hands. The swords contained a frosty element that discomforted her, as if it could extinguish the fire of life, greatly diminishing the effectiveness of her healing spells. Years of combat experience told her she couldn't keep fighting like this. Escape was her only option, or death would be her only conclusion today. A brief moment was all she needed to cast a high-level teleportation technique and make her escape. However, the situation made it clear she would have to pay a significant price before she could leave. With that in mind, the succubus steeled herself, her claws and tendrils erupting with ultimate speed, trying to seize a split-second advantage. Lancelot knew his enemy was fighting desperately. He pushed the true chi in his dantian to its limit almost instantly. Coupled with Colin's haste spell effect, he surprisingly kept pace with the adversary's 2 claws and 4 tendrils. Continue your adventure with Empire. The succubus knew the defining moment between life and death had arrived. She feigned a move, and suddenly, her tendrils shot forward aggressively, while her feet pushed against the ground, propelling her body swiftly backward. She was resigned to the tail-breaking survival tactic of a gecko, ready to sacrifice all her tendrils being severed in exchange for time to cast her teleportation magic. Lancelot nearly instantly grasped her intention. His mind focused, the cyan glow that had clung to the giant sword Glacier suddenly surged, only to fade away as if it lacked further support. But his attack was already in motion, and the great sword slashed down fiercely. The 4 tendrils were uniformly severed like sausages on a chopping board, scattering in all directions, knocking over piles of gold coins. But the corner of the succubus's mouth revealed a trace of joy, since she had completed casting the high-level teleportation technique, and the magic was about to take effect. It was too rash of her to have hurried over after receiving the alarm. Once she returned, she would immediately summon her 7 most capable subordinates and return through the otherworldly teleportation technique. Determined, she resolved to capture these audacious thieves alive and spend the next century nowhere else but in the dungeon, tormenting these succubi every minute, especially this bizarre nightly succubus. She would drain her soul completely dry to uncover the secret behind her exceptional strength. And that priestess, why would they be with a priestess? And that bearded succubus, what's that about? Why hasn't the teleportation magic triggered yet? Right. I still need to appease these thieves, can't let them run away, otherwise, it'll be a bit of trouble to catch up later. Goodbye, you little thieves. The succubus bluffed, one day, I will find you. But the reaction of the other party was quite peculiar, as they maintained the posture of chopping down, with no withdrawal of their sword. The succubus knight across lifted her head, and those beautiful eyes were filled with coldness as she spoke in an indifferent voice. You're already dead. Hey! What's happening? What did he say? The cheerleaders next to them had been awestruck by Lancelot's still posture, and at this word, they unconsciously spoke out at the same time. The succubus wanted to say something else, but after she finished speaking, her mouth didn't close, her right upper lip and left lower lip were stuck together, as if they couldn't separate. What's going on? This was the last thought in the succubus's mind. Because of the movement while speaking, some kind of balance seemed to have been disrupted. The succubus's head split open like a watermelon from the top, a large amount of blood mist erupted from the cracks, like a boiling kettle. The bisected vitreous body slipped from the eye sockets but was caught by the optic nerves, swaying in mid-air like wind chimes. The crack continued to extend downward, through her neck, chest cavity, heart, stomach, all the way to the base of her right thigh. The teleportation magic didn't trigger for some reason until now. A flash of yellow light passed by, and half of the succubus's right side disappeared, leaving behind half of her brain, a major part of her body, and 2 relatively intact legs. The exposed cut surface spewed out a large amount of blood, and broken internal organs slipped from the abdomen. The surface rapidly grew a mass of tumors and ulcers, as if some supernatural force sustaining the demon's life was quickly dissipating. The unbalanced corpse fell on a pile of gold coins stained with blood. This succubus died, dying on the treasure she was meant to protect. It's unknown if her brain, before splitting in half, could comprehend what the succubus knight's words "you're already dead" meant. The reality was, the moment Lancelot had swung that great sword, she switched the true chi that powered the King Yun's sword art with innate true chi. This not only extended the great sword's sword aura by 3 feet but also caused its color to become nearly transparent from a faint cyan glow. This was Lancelot's final killing move. The bulkiness of the giant sword glacier was too obvious, so he powered a singular attack with the King Yun's sword art using innate true chi, and although the sword aura was nearly transparent, it would still cause a slight refraction of light. An opponent fully focused might still be able to dodge, but the succubus's own tentacles blocked most of her view, coupled with the need to concentrate on casting spells, which allowed Lancelot to strike a killing blow on the enemy on the spot. Chapter 104. Lancelot's heart was still beating frantically. In this battle, he truly pulled out all the stops, holding nothing back. He was fortunate to have detected the fluctuations of the teleportation magic in advance and launched a preemptive attack while the enemy was unprepared. He then made his initial advantage snowball, never giving the enemy a chance to turn the tables, and in the end, seized on the fatal error made by the opponent due to their intent to retreat. Find exclusive content at Empire. But in reality, Lancelot had expended a great deal. This was the first time he had gone all out since becoming a spiritual cultivator, and his control of power was far from perfect. If the fight had dragged on, he might have run out of true chi and been unable to maintain his suppression over the enemy. Had the succubus realized that these few succubi were merely humans affected by transfiguration, the situation would have been even more perilous. They possess a series of potent enchantment control system spells targeted at humans, and Lancelot did not want to test whether his mental techniques for controlling emotions could withstand the enchantment. He reached into his breastplate and extravagantly pulled out an upper-grade spirit stone crystal to recover his true chi quickly. Upper-grade spirit stones had a much swifter recovery rate than middle-grade, and with such a big haul today, there was no need to be stingy now. While recovering his true chi, he turned to say something only to realize that Bruto and the others were still in shock. There was no helping it, Lancelot's performance just now had been terrifying. Despite Colin's haste spell's influence, that overwhelming might had broken through the limits of mortals, making one wonder if this succubus form of Lancelot had become something else. All right, it's all taken care of," said Lancelot in a relaxed tone, bringing back a sense of familiarity for everyone. He picked up the dimensional bag from the ground, peeked inside through the opening, and was nearly blinded by the radiance of the treasures. "We've really hit the jackpot today, we should head out. If we don't leave now, I'm afraid others will come," he declared. Only then did the group snap out of their trance, with Alamir giving Lancelot a thumbs up and saying in admiration, "I've really seen something today. Too bad Kola's still asleep, she loves thrilling battles the most. Boss, your magician bloodline is just too strong. Maybe one morning we'll wake up to find your head has turned into a dragon's." "I promise I won't be surprised," Bruto shrugged his shoulders. "Too bad my hammer didn't hit. Seems like Moradin didn't want me stealing your spotlight today. I believe there will be plenty of opportunities for that hammer to come in handy in the future." Lancelot re-shouldered Frost Slash. There was no place for Glacier, so he had to carry it in hand for now. "Let's go. Aren't you forgetting something?" Bruto looked at him doubtfully. "We went through so much trouble to kill that thing, don't miss out on checking if she had any good stuff on her." Lancelot slapped his forehead and hurriedly ran to inspect the shattered corpse on the ground. 2 rings embellished with gemstones adorned the left hand of the succubus. Closer inspection revealed a faint spiritual light flickering, a hallmark of magical items. Lancelot stripped them off for Colin to investigate their effects later. Colin had previously educated them with lots of adventurers' knowledge. Though scholars have virtually no experience in adventures, they possess abundant theoretical knowledge. Such unknown magical items should not be equipped carelessly, especially the spoils from evil creatures, as many are cursed with effects like having to kill someone daily, pain under sunlight, or hearing insane whisperings leading to mental instability. Moreover, most can't be removed once worn. Since the right half of the succubus had been teleported to an unknown location, naturally there wasn't a ring for him to pull off. Lancelot guessed that the succubus was probably teleported back to its own lair. He wondered what it must have been like for its underlings to suddenly see a third of their boss's body materialize out of thin air, probably a mix of shock and delight. Imagining such a scene, Lancelot couldn't help but chuckle to himself. He had to admit the fight had been quite exhilarating, although, he speculated, had he been on the losing side, he might not have felt the same way. Just as Lancelot was about to get up and leave, Alamir approached. Suppressing his disgust, he glanced at the corpse and hesitantly said, "Succubi are fond of hiding things inside their bodies. The succubus might have had the same habit. Don't you want to check again?" Lancelot, Bruto, and Paladin looked at the nearly naked corpse on the ground and simultaneously turned their questioning gazes towards the elf. Maybe I'm just too familiar with these demons," the elf said helplessly as he walked toward the mutilated body. "Gentlemen, I suggest you avert your eyes." A minute later, the completely stripped body of the succubus was cast aside, and everyone looked awkwardly at a sticky bag in Alamir's hand, an actual dimensional bag. "I still haven't developed the habit of looting bodies right after killing enemies," Lancelot lamented internally. Back in the military, one only needed to fight, nobody would carry treasures on them, and magical items were mere legends. Clean up after a battle was someone else's job, and he had almost missed out on this valuable find. The elf priest's face stiffened as he cast a first circle divine art, the water conjuring spell, and a stream of water appeared out of thin air. Alamir used the water he had summoned to clean the surface of the bag, then opened it to peer inside, while the others watched his actions intently. There's nothing else here, just a set of cleric equipment." He turned the dimensional bag inside out, a move that would spill all of its contents. Instantly, a cleric's robe, a set of chain mail, a uniquely designed nail-headed hammer, and a shield fell to the ground. Seeing nothing unusual emerge, everyone breathed a sigh of relief. Alamir, who had turned the dimensional bag right side out again, tossed it to Lancelot and asked, "I can use these equipments, right?" "Of course," Lancelot replied, accepting the dimensional bag. He probed it with his divine sense and, confirming it was empty but with quite a bit more space than his current one, stowed the great sword Glacier inside it and then tied the new bag around his waist. The one already filled with treasures was tucked into his chest. "Look, this shield has the emblem of Tyr." Paladin pointed at the pattern of a warmer and scales painted on the shield. "This is probably what the succubus used to disguise itself as someone else." A glow emanated from Alamir's hand as he gently touched the shield's face, transforming the pattern of the warmer and scales into the portrait of a lady with fluffy hair. "Now it bears the emblem of the Lady of Love, Shania," said the elf with a shrug, donning the rest of the equipment. Chapter 105. "Ha! Another dimensional bag, let's pack some more," Bruto said excitedly, rubbing his hands together enthusiastically. Lancelot was about to say something, but his expression suddenly changed. He pulled a small ball from his bosom. It had several cracks on its surface that were expanding rapidly. Within moments, it had completely turned into a pile of fragments. "The goblins are in trouble," Lancelot said with a solemn face, and started running out. "We've already gathered enough, they need help now." Upon hearing this, everyone was stunned, but they immediately followed him. Bruto had already grabbed a handful of gemstones and was stuffing them into his robe haphazardly. It was still too difficult for a dwarf to discard these shiny stones. The group ran up the stairs a bit further but found that there was no way to go. At that moment, Alamir pulled a lever on the wall, and the ceiling above creaked open. After they climbed out through the exit, they realized they were right in the center of the stage. Lancelot glanced around and immediately understood the severity of the situation. There were several large holes in the ceiling, with flashes of fire visible in the night sky. The floor too had many holes. Apparently, the boulder that had crashed into the resting room came from here. The succubus palace had already partially collapsed, and there was no one around. From afar, the dense sound of weapon clashes and shouts indicated that a large-scale battle was underway. Lancelot spotted a huge hole in a wall not far from them, identified the direction, and confirmed that it was where Phil had placed explosives. He then led everyone towards that hole. Passing through that hole, they arrived at a main street in Oasis Fort. Looking around, battles were taking place everywhere, with various types of demons and humans fighting against magical creatures they had never seen before, plunging them immediately into the midst of battle. A volley of arrow-like objects flew towards them from above, and Lancelot, quick as a flash, swung his sword and deflected them all. He looked up and saw a group of creatures resembling small gargoyles with purple skin, holding long spears, and with a spiny tail hanging beneath them. A flick could shoot out a spine. Bruto let out a roar, quite coarse for a succubus, and threw his hammer. The hammer, spinning rapidly, traced a wave-like path through the air. One of the creatures failed to dodge in time, was struck squarely, and screamed as it fell out of their sight. "Ha! Bullseye!" Bruto proudly exclaimed, catching the hammer as it flew back to him. "That's a Baz demon," Paladin said with a furrowed brow. "How could they be here?" Who cares why? Bruto said irritably, scanning the surroundings. Where is Uncle Vito and the others? Did that damned goblin mess something up? They should be nearby. Lancelot recalled the conversation between the six-fingered prince and Tajana, and his unease grew stronger. Oasis Fort was at least nominally a neutral town, but now, demons were here. What did that mean? He looked around to make sure no one was watching them and decided to take a risk by going up in the air. He turned back to his companions and instructed. You guys retreat to the succubus palace to hide for a while. I'll go up and see if I can find Phil and the others. Go up. Bruto looked at him with surprise. How are you going to do that? By flying, of course. Lancelot flapped the bat wings on his back. I've practiced. He crouched down and then leaped upwards sharply, flapping his wings, and truly, albeit shakily, flew up into the air. Although he had practiced, he had only mastered ascending, descending, turning in circles on the spot, and diving forward, movements that couldn't compare to those creatures born with wings, let alone fighting in the air. He did not dare fly too high, carefully ascending along the high walls of the succubus palace, hiding in the dim shadows. The night sky over the plains of the abyss also had a moon, but this moon looked distant and dim, more like a blurry projection from another world, casting only a faint glimmer. Hovering in mid-air, the first thing Lancelot noticed was that Oasis Fort was burning everywhere. There actually wasn't much fighting inside the city. The real fierce battles were happening on the city walls, with fireballs occasionally hurling down with red trails, smashing the battling sides into a bloody mud, but they were immediately reoccupied by the combatants. Several sections of the wall had already collapsed, and battles for control were happening at each breach, but it seemed they were not yet lost. However, it was possible that some slip-through enemies had stormed in when the walls were first breached, which explained the scattered battles inside the city. It indeed appeared to be a sudden raid by the Demon Legion, and though uncertain of the enemy's strength, Oasis Fort's defenses looked ready to crumble, especially since its lord, the male succubus Molo, was not in the city. Explore Hidden Tales at Empire. After grasping the general situation, Lancelot didn't look closely anymore, but quickly scanned the nearby areas where battles were occurring, hoping to spot Phil and the others. Catching on that concentrating true chi in his eyes enhanced his abilities, he quickly spotted several dwarves within less than a block's distance, surrounded and attacked by about 7 or 8 enemies with purple skin, wielding large cleavers. The dwarves, back against a street corner, had formed a tight defensive formation, with the light of healing divine arts occasionally flashing over them, which seemed to barely keep them supported, but Lancelot knew that once the priest exhausted their divine arts, they would be in danger. He confirmed the route over, folded his wings, and plummeted downwards. Just before hitting the ground, he vigorously flapped his wings a few times, which slightly slowed his descent, but he still crashed heavily onto the ground, creating a circle of web-like cracks centered around him. How is it? Did you find them? Bruto burst out immediately after hearing the noise, anxiously asking. Follow me, they need support, Lancelot said briefly, then turned and ran out along the route he had memorized. The rest quickly followed, as under their succubus forms, their speed was not slow, and surprisingly, Alamir, clad in chainmail, effortlessly kept up with them. Tough guy, Bruto looked back and winked at the elf. Regular training, the elf responded tersely. After about 2 minutes of running, they could already hear the battle cries of Moradin up ahead. Bruto let out a roar, his eyes turning blood red, and his speed increased by a third, rushing past Lancelot to lead the charge. The moment he saw the enemy's back, the bearded succubus fiercely threw his hammer, not slowing his steps, and crazily charged forward holding his shield. Chapter 106. The hammer whistled through the air and slammed into the back of a purple demon, sending the enemy flying with a deep dent formed in its back. The sudden attack from behind caught the enemy off guard, but these demons exhibited a discipline that left a deep impression on Lancelot. Generally, such pincer movements would send most soldiers into a panic, but these demons did not show the slightest disarray. The 3 that stood at the back quickly turned around, forming a defensive formation, ready to face this new foe. It was then that Lancelot got a clear view of these demons. At first glance, these demons looked like muscular humans, but their purple skin, thick tails behind them, long and sharp fingernails, and elf-like pointed ears all indicated their extraordinary nature. But what was most impressive were their beards. The beards of these demons were as thick as thumbs, nearly a foot long, and ended in thorn-like spikes. These vine-like whiskers grew from their chins to the roots of their ears. From the small booklets Paladin had previously given him, which introduced common creatures from the lower planes, Lancelot had read about these types of demons. In the infernal language, the name for this kind of demon is Barbazu, but they are more widely known as beard demons, for obvious reasons. These demons were the backbone of the Nine Hells Legion. Unlike those barbarian-like berserk demons in the demon army, the Barbazu were true professional soldiers. Although their individual strength was greatly inferior to the berserk demon, their iron discipline and tenacious combat spirit often allowed them to defeat enemies several times their own strength. This is the nature of demons. Their lawful disposition ensures they act in a completely different manner from demons. The eternal blood war between demons and demons started before mortals came into being, and will likely not end until mortals are completely extinct. Despite being outnumbered and not as powerful individually, demons have mostly been on the winning side for the majority of the blood war. While infighting and individualistic combat among demons is certainly a reason, there is no denying that with iron discipline, superior command, and clever strategy, demons perform much better on the battlefield than demons. Lancelot had also read several reports of the blood war, and amidst all the sensational, contradictory, and nonsensical text, he could still roughly piece together the process of battle. Aside from the scale and gore far exceeding ordinary mortal understanding, the process of the battle reads like a large mob of peasants with pitchforks attacking a well-armed, well-trained regular army. The outcome was hardly difficult to predict. The beard demons before him were the most common infantry in the demon army. Most of their bodies were bare, but their vital parts were protected by simplistic metal armor. The weapon in their hands was a large cleaver, which had a pole-like handle similar to a lance, but ended in a foot-long pointed blade that enabled them to both thrust and swing, a typical weapon suited for large-scale warfare. Facing the enemies who were charging at a high speed with shields raised, the three beard demons quickly adjusted their formation. The two demons on the sides slightly spread out, while the one in the middle took a step back. Lancelot thought to himself that this was bad, and he quickly quickened his pace. Bruto, charging in front, had already caught his hammer flying back to him. Facing the three gleaming blade tips, he recklessly crashed into them with his shield. He did indeed collide with the enemy, but the raised long swords weakened the force of the impact. Just as Bruto was about to raise his hammer for another blow, enemies from both sides already swooped in on his flanks like lightning. Unlike Lancelot, Bruto's height had increased by a foot after his transformation into a succubus, and this change in height genuinely affected his combat skills. Facing the incoming weapons of the enemies, he instinctively tried to duck to evade, but he misjudged his new height, and both blades cut deep across his back. Bruto groaned in pain and rolled vehemently to one side. The armor on his body absorbed some of the force, but the sharp blade still created two bloody wounds on his back. The beard demons to his left and right immediately pursued the fallen Bruto. Struggling to his feet while half-kneeling, Bruto blocked the incoming blade on the left with his giant shield and swatted away the cleaving attack from the right with his hammer. Just as Bruto thought the danger had momentarily passed, the beard demon on his right leaned in with its head. In a split second, Bruto realized in disbelief that the creature dared to headbutt a dwarf, as he appeared to be a succubus in the demon's eye, but in the next moment, the demon's seemingly submissive beard suddenly stiffened, launching forward like spears toward his face. Bruto desperately tilted his head back, narrowly avoiding his face, but his chest and shoulder were struck squarely. His armor once again reduced the impact of the attack, yet still left several bloody holes in his body. As the enemy prepared to continue the assault, Bruto's face cloth fell off again due to his vigorous movement, revealing a succubus visage with a fiery red beard. Even the most rigorously disciplined demon warriors, who wouldn't budge despite facing a charge by several times more demons, were visibly taken aback by the sight. By the time they snapped out of their momentary daze, Lancelot had already charged to Bruto's defense. Taking advantage of the momentum from his charge, Lancelot skillfully executed an over-the-shoulder slash and shouted at Bruto. "Fall back!" Frost Slash's blade shone with a cyan light, the signature color of the cold iron weapon infused with the King Yun sword art's sword aura. The beard demon that Lancelot attacked swung its cleaver in an attempt to deflect the knight's assault, what turned out to be perhaps the gravest, and definitely the last mistake of its demonic existence. The beard demon's large cleaver was like rotten wood, easily split by Lancelot's long sword without any deflection of his blade. The knight's sword glow continued forward, passing between the demon's eyes, which bulged in shock, freezing its expression forever. Discover exclusive tales on Empire. With words and attack that seemed to carry a compelling force, Bruto found himself retreating rapidly to the rear as Lancelot had instructed, something a dwarf in combat mode would definitely not normally do. But retreating was undoubtedly the wise choice. A shield pressed against his back, and Alamir's voice echoed from behind. "For great love! It must be said that the battle cry of the fiery-haired lady's priest was laden with incongruity. Fortunately, this did not affect the effectiveness of the healing spell. The emblem of Shania on Alamir's shield lit up, and a surge of positive energy in the form of a white radiance flowed into Bruto's body. This was the priest's Circle 1 Divine Arts healing spell, but Bruto's wounds were far from light, and Alamir performed a Circle Up casting, consuming a Circle 2 spell slot to make the Divine Arts more powerful. Chapter 107. Shania's holy emblem emitted a bright red light, filled with positive energy and symbolic of life force, which surged into Bruto's body. The wounds on his back and shoulders healed at a visible rate. Bruto blinked and realized that the pain had left his body. The formerly dire wounds had now become no more serious than scrapes from a fall. Thanks to Bruto's reckless move, the previously dire situation of several temple guards had greatly improved. Each of the dwarf warriors was injured, but none severely. Dwarves, too, possessed a fine warrior tradition, with military prowess no less inferior to that of the demons. After Lancelot and Bruto each killed a beard demon, the number of beard demons decreased to 6, turning the tide immediately. Now outnumbered, these demons were caught between attacks from the front and the rear. "Good heavens, Lancelot, you arrived just in time," came a voice from behind the temple guards. It was a goblin, sounding lively and completely unharmed. "What in the world is this bearded succubus? Is it that fool Bruto?" "You're the fool! Green-skinned dwarf melon!" Bruto roared back in the roughest voice a succubus could possibly have and charged forward again, swinging his hammer. Meanwhile, Lancelot was entangled in a fierce battle with the remaining 2 beard demons. While the demons were assaulting the city, many more battles awaited him that night. To conserve his true chi, he now relied solely on his physical strength to fight, still holding the upper hand despite facing 2 opponents. The demons had seen Alamir heal Bruto and, after witnessing Lancelot's superb swordsmanship, they understood clearly they had no chance of winning. Suddenly, one of the beard demons shouted something in a very rough language, and the demons sprang into action. A beard demon launched a fierce attack on Lancelot and the temple guards, while the remaining 4 without hesitation fled down a nearby small path. As a cleaver from a beard demon suddenly stabbed at him, Lancelot executed his signature sword move, a downward swing followed by a turn and horizontal slash, ending with a stabbing thrust. His first downward swing knocked the enemy's weapon into the ground, the following horizontal slash severed the unretreated arms of the beard demon at the elbows, and the final thrust pierced directly into the beard demon's face. He remembered Paladin had said the weakness of demons was the heart, and that of demons was the brain. These swordsmanship skills he was already highly proficient in had been further enhanced by his physical augmentations as a spiritual cultivator, enabling him to execute the triple move as fast as lightning, almost within the blink of an eye. However, the enemy's purpose was still achieved, as another beard demon, which had also been engaging Lancelot, had now escaped dozens of feet away. Read new chapters at Empire. The situation was similar on the other end. Faced with an enemy's sudden burst of attack, the dwarves reflexively chose to tighten their defense. By the time they realized the demon's intentions, the other 3 beard demons had already ran beyond their attack range. Meeting up with the one that fled from Lancelot, they all sprinted along a small alley to escape. Lancelot frowned. It seemed that he couldn't conserve his true chi after all. He was about to perform a wood system divine skill, summoning vines from the ground to entangle the enemies, but he stopped his hand movement mid-air as Paladin acted quicker. The scholar activated a scroll he had prepared earlier, and yellow magic aura gathered around him. As he uttered the last word of the spell, it vanished in the direction his finger pointed. Simultaneously, a vast expanse of grey-white webs appeared out of nowhere beneath and around the fleeing demons, completely blocking the beard demons' escape routes. 3 beard demons were almost instantly entangled in the webs, but one, using agile movement techniques, managed to dodge the web's ensnarement. Seeing its companions all trapped, it cursed but showed no intention of stopping to help. Instead, it swiftly darted to the side, trying to skirt around the web-covered area via a wall corner. At that moment, Lancelot had drawn a sharply edged silver coin, but another unexpected aid made him stop again. A figure suddenly leaped down from the rooftop of a building on the street side, and the fleeing demon only looked up in surprise as the figure was almost upon it. 2 short swords glowing with a green light thrust into the demon's eye sockets, pierced the eyeballs, and then dug into the brain behind them. Leveraging the force of the descent, the assailant's twin swords directly penetrated the beard demon's skull, then twisted the demon's head backward to an impossible angle, emitting a clear snap of breaking vertebrae. Meanwhile, Paladin had already pulled out his sling, ready to launch cold iron projectiles at the demons who could neither fight back nor dodge, but a large round bomb had already landed in the web, marked with a skull, with only half a foot of fuse left burning rapidly. "Damn it, Phil, to hell with you!" The assailant cursed loudly. In response was the goblin's unpleasant laughter. Lancelot recognized it as the voice of Old Reep, the spy disguised as a bartender from Twin Bridges town. Old Reep suddenly ran towards Lancelot's side. Lancelot noticed that the bartender was now in a half-werewolf state. Apart from his nails that seemed excessively long, his body was still mostly human, but on his neck was a terrifying wolf's head, running while frequently turning to check the fuses burn. Lancelot was startled by his actions, flapping his wings instinctively forward, causing his whole body to slide backward. When the bomb's fuse was finally about to burn out, Old Reep had already run more than 20 feet away. He abruptly threw himself to the ground, firmly covering his head with both hands. This posture stunned everyone, but after a few seconds, nothing happened. The beard demons, trapped in the web, also stared tensely at the bomb, heaving a sigh of relief and opening their mouths as if to say something. Just then, the explosion occurred. First, there was a strong flash of light, followed by burst flames that engulfed all the demons, and then a circle of visible shockwave followed. Lancelot sharply turned around, his wings tightly wrapped around his body, using his sword to brace against the ground, barely managing to stabilize himself. Bruto and Paladin didn't react as quickly, their succubus wings like sails absorbing too much wind, blasting them backward like sheets of paper fiercely blown away. "Oh haha! What a beautiful explosion!" Phil's voice came up, filled with a sick frenzy. All of a sudden, Lancelot particularly understood Old Reep's earlier reaction, noting that the werewolf apparently wasn't a first-time victim of this goblin's explosive schemes. Chapter 108. Phil. A piercing howl of a wolf echoed as Old Reep suddenly leaped from the ground and pounced toward the culprit responsible for the explosion. Lancelot looked towards where the demon had been trapped. The cobwebs were evidently flammable, the blaze from the explosion first ignited them and then blew them apart. If Oasis Fort had been a town mainly built of wood, a terrible fire would have already begun. The three demons at the center naturally couldn't have survived the blast. If they had spent the time they were staring dumbfounded at the bomb trying to get free of the web, they might have had a sliver of hope, but now their bodies had been blown into 100 pieces, evenly scattered over a 9-foot radius, dead beyond any doubt. Faced with the ferociously approaching werewolf bartender, Phil frantically began running circles around the dwarf guards, attempting to avoid capture by the angry victim. But his short goblin legs were obviously no match for the half-werewolf Reep, who caught him by the collar and lifted him high into the air. "Easy, easy!" the goblin cried out, "Your claws are hurting me." They were already tangled. Reep's terrifying wolf face roared in Phil's face, showering him with saliva. "All you needed was a longer stick to poke them to death. What's wrong with using a bomb? I clearly left you plenty of time to get away." Phil argued anxiously, "Oh look, there's a toe, here's a nose, and what's that lump of mush over there? The demon's little ding-dong? Why are they all over the place?" "Because my bomb did the job quick and well. I swear, if it happens again, I'll twist off your head, have the chef from the succubus palace take care of it, and then eat it spoonful by spoonful." The werewolf raged with bloodshot eyes, and if his threatening words hadn't sounded so logical, Lancelot might have thought he would actually lose control and tear the goblin to pieces the next moment. Excuse me for a moment, we brought out that chef from the succubus palace," Lancelot said, barely holding back his laughter, and pointed behind him, as well as the top male host. "Gentlemen, please allow me to introduce, this is Alamir, a priest of the god of love." Please disregard the first part of the introduction about me," the elf priest walked over somewhat embarrassed. "As Sir Lancelot mentioned, I am a priest of Shania, and if you have any worries or questions about love, you can come to me." "No way, you're that priest!" Reep exclaimed, dropping Phil to the ground, the latter also looking surprised at Alamir. As far as I know, there aren't any other priests from my former colleagues," Alamir said uncomfortably under the werewolf's intense gaze. "I guess you all are friends of Sir Lancelot." Friends might be a stretch, more like colleagues." Reep retracted his claws and shook hands with Alamir. "That goblin over there is Phil, just like me, special agents under Tajana, Lord of Twin Bridges town." "I've heard the name Tajana countless times," Alamir raised an eyebrow. "Many succubi seem to admire her greatly." "You'll find she's indeed quite charismatic," the goblin joined in. "Pleased to meet you, I've heard a lot about you." What did Lancelot mention earlier?" That the chef from the succubus palace was also brought out. Ah! Right, right. The elf clapped his hands. Thanks to your reminder, she should be waking up any minute now. Lancelot's expression changed as he took out the dimensional bag, reached into it, and in an instant, the halfling chef appeared before everyone. Oh, I like this trick, Phil remarked, but normally shouldn't you start with a pigeon or a rabbit before you get to a live person? Oh, Alamir, there you are, Kola said, rubbing his eyes. I was having a great dream where I lay amidst countless treasures. I was just about to count those beauties when I felt a big hand plucking me out. That big hand is still holding onto your collar, Alamir pointed to the halfling's back, where Lancelot was gently setting Kola down on the ground. Oh, thank you. Kola finally noticed his predicament. Where is this? Have we come out yet? Welcome to the ground of Oasis Fort, Old Reap said with a grin to the halfling. You're the chef skilled in cooking goblin brains, aren't you? Actually, that dish was never made with goblin brains, Kola admitted, embarrassed. Just use some beans, fat, fish meat, and egg whites, and you can create that soft and tender white stuff. Tastes really amazing. What a pity, I was hoping you could do something with this guy's brain. The half-werewolf glared fiercely at the goblin, so he won't blow us all to smithereens one day with his bombs. At this point, the 4 dwarf temple guards also finished tending to their wounds and walked towards Lancelot's group. Bruto's eyes lit up, and he hurriedly went forward to greet them. Uncle Wit! The bearded succubus called out to the dwarf priest, are you guys all right? By Moradin, Bruto? Is that you? The dwarves looked completely shocked by Bruto's present form. They were well aware of the details of the plan but had not actually seen the transformed appearances of Lancelot's group. It's me, haha. Bruto took off his transforming ring and reverted back to his dwarven appearance, rushing up to give old dwarf Wit a big hug. We succeeded. Why did you have to take off that ring before hugging me? I've seen plenty of succubi in Twin Bridges town, but no one could compare to you. Priest Wit chuckled, those demons' whiskers are poisonous, but we dwarves are not afraid of such mild poison. However, their weapons did give us quite a bit of trouble, just a scratch would cause unstoppable bleeding, but luckily you all arrived. Did you get the cross pickaxe? Where is it? It's with me, Lancelot said, taking the cross pickaxe out of the dimensional bag and handing it to Wit. Take a look, was this worth risking so much for? Stay updated through Empire. Upon seeing the cross pickaxe, the dwarf priest's expression became very serious. He carefully took it, murmuring something in Dwarven under his breath, his hands gently brushing the surface of the cross pickaxe. A gold emblem appeared on the cross pickaxe, and Lancelot saw it was in the shape of a mountain with a gemstone within it, and next to it was a line of text written in Dwarven. That's the emblem of Dumasong, the keeper of secret treasures among the Dwarven gods, Paladin explained to Lancelot. With the power of this deity, any items related to the dwarves can reveal much information to them. Chapter 109. This is indeed Dane Frostbeard's holy relic, Vito declared, his eyes filled with fervor. Give us more time, and perhaps we could uncover some clues that tell us the whereabouts of this platinum guard. The Father God would surely be pleased. Sorry to interrupt, Old Reap, the werewolf, spoke up impatiently. It's enough to confirm that the thing is all right. When you return to Twin Bridges town, you'll have plenty of time to study it slowly, but right now, we have worse things to worry about. When I flew up into the sky just now, I saw the demons fiercely attacking the city, Lancelot said with a frown. You're the local leader here, have you heard anything? No more than anyone else, the werewolf shrugged. There was absolutely no warning. The demon legion just appeared like that, probably using some kind of concealment magic. Wait, no wonder some of the scouting teams went missing, they must have stumbled upon some traces and then got caught by the demons. At least Molo has boosted the guard's strength, so this still doesn't count as a successful surprise attack, Lancelot nodded. But why would the demons attack Oasis Fort? Just a month ago, I heard that Volcano Fortress was fiercely battling the Demon Legion. Could it be that Volcano Fortress has fallen? That's unlikely, Old Reap shook his head. Destruction Flame Visovius might be a temperamental tyrant, but breaking through his defenses would require one of the 8 demon generals in person. However, it would not be difficult for a small troop to bypass the fortified zone of Volcano Fortress. What's bad is, once Oasis Fort falls, Twin Bridges town will not only have its supply routes cut off but will also have to face the edge of the Demon Legion directly, Phil said, his face looking extremely grim as his deep green skin nearly turned black with worry. Anyway, we must let Lady Tajana know about this as soon as possible. Old Reap shook his head. I definitely don't want to stay in a place that's about to be conquered by demons. Why don't we try to help defend Oasis Fort? Lancelot cautiously suggested. We're not short of hands, and these ordinary demon soldiers don't seem too hard to deal with. Help Molo, that backstabbing scum, protect his house. Old Reap looked at Lancelot incredulously, trying to make his words sound less harsh. If we succeed, that male succubus won't be grateful in the slightest, highly likely he'll even round up all the impressive performers as spies and torture them for interrogation. I definitely don't want to attract any of his attention. If we fail, and unfortunately don't die on the spot in battle but get captured by the demons, the goblin added rarely, his face full of intimidating expressions. Those Bartes from the Nine Hells will pull out a thick stack of contracts for you to sign to become their eternal slave, and in the corner, it's especially noted that even your soul after death belongs to them. If you say no, no worries, after experiencing 72 tortures from the demons, you get to choose again. All right, I get it, Lancelot shrugged helplessly. I guess you guys happen to know some secret passage that allows us to slip quietly out of the city. The goblin and the werewolf exchanged glances. Old Reap twitched his eyebrows, and Phil cracked a smile and spoke. Thanks to Molo's insane entry tax, there isn't just one secret passage like this. Old Reap, tell us. As an agent lurking in a hostile town, well, not quite, since Oasis Fort and Twin Bridges Town aren't openly hostile. Anyway, I do know several passages like this. The werewolf bartender spoke somewhat incoherently. The first is the aqueduct under the workshop district. It was built by dwarf slaves, and smugglers dug a little path at a small corner, leading all the way to a cave outside the city. But I guess it's already crowded with people now, so I wouldn't recommend that route. Then why mention it? Bruto muttered grudgingly, why not just tell us the usable route? I'm just giving you plenty of options. The werewolf shrugged. The second passage is the drainage ditch of Oasis Fort, and there's an entrance to the main channel right in my pub's basement. The smell of this route might not be very pleasant, and its exit is right under the city wall. Emerging there, we'd be in the middle of the battlefield, where both sides wouldn't mind crushing a bunch of rats crawling out of the hole. Sorry, if you were alone, this passage would actually be quite good. You could linger around the exit for a while, waiting for the right opportunity to slip out. Lancelot nodded to the werewolf, but it's too conspicuous for all of us together, so this route won't work either. Well, I hadn't really thought that much about it. Old Reap looked very sincere. That leaves only the third route. There's always been a legend in Oasis Fort about a secret passage under the slave pens that the slaves used to escape. The passage does exist, but the legend isn't entirely accurate, because it was actually dug by hyena men studying necromancy to steal bodies, and now it's filled with packs of undead creatures, and something even worse. Indeed, some slaves discovered this passage and thus disappeared from Oasis Fort, but the fate awaiting them was not escape but becoming part of those undead creatures. Undead creatures? You mean like zombies and skeletons? Lancelot asked curiously. Weapons still hurt them, right? I mean, considering they've already died once. Chopping off the head of an undead can surely quiet them, but you have to be careful. Undead won't lose their combat ability just because their kidney is hit or an arm is chopped off, Old Reap explained, but my main concern was thinking about our two priests. Their divine arts are a bane to undead creatures. Good. Lancelot nodded. Where's the entrance and exit of this secret passage? The entrance is in the corpse pit at the bottom of the slave pens, not a very pleasant place. The exit leads to a hyena man den underground in a small grove outside the city, from where we can find many exits, and of course, a bunch of hyena men eagerly welcoming us at home, though they won't be tougher to handle than the Demon Legion. While they were talking, fireballs streaked across the sky, and one fell on a street not far from them, smashing into the ground creating a large crater. The massive tremor caused everyone to stumble and fall to the ground. Continue reading at Empire. That grove is also precisely the rally point we arranged with Yaduz, Phil said while dusting off his clothes. The demon's assault seems to be getting stronger. Let's use the passage beneath the slave pens and leave now. Is he here too? The werewolf raised an eyebrow and looked up to determine the direction. Seems like the choice is quite clear now. Follow me. Chapter 110. So, can we take off the transformation rings now? Bruto complained as he followed along. I guess those zombies and skeletons aren't exactly interested in beauty. Yes, but it's best to keep one. The identity of the succubus might help us get into the slave enclosure. I'll keep it, Lancelot said confidently. The transformation doesn't greatly affect my combat abilities. Whatever makes you happy. Bruto shrugged, removed his transformation ring, and, with a flash of magic, he turned back into the young dwarf. Ah, this feels much better. The werewolf reap led the way at the front, with Bruto and the succubus-figured Lancelot following close behind. Paladin didn't revert from his succubus form either. He, along with Alamir, Kola, Phil, and dwarf priest Wit, walked in the middle of the group. The remaining 3 temple guards of Moradin followed at the very end, these brave dwarves responsible for covering the rear. Aside from the halfling Kola, everyone in the group had impressive combat capabilities. Phil might be an unstable factor, since the goblins' bombs posed a great threat to both enemies and allies alike. However, Kola seemed familiar with this type of adventurous activity. Nobody noticed when she ended up with a small knife in her hand, apparently the blade of the large cleaver that Lancelot had chopped off. Moreover, Lancelot noticed that her furry bare feet made no sound on the ground, just like a cat's. Lancelot reminded himself to ask this little one how she ended up in this dreadful plane. The group swiftly navigated through Oasis Fort, occasionally encountering small bands of demons. These purple Bartes wisely chose not to trouble them, partly because the group looked genuinely formidable. The occasional falling boulders posed a greater threat, but after the first near miss, Lancelot's spirit perception was fully alert. With deliberate caution, he could always give a heads up in time, allowing the team to proceed swiftly without mishaps. Before long, they had crossed the not-so-large commercial district of the Oasis Fort and arrived at the entrance of the slave enclosure. They hid in the shadows of the buildings across the street, stealthily observing the situation near the entrance. Though called an enclosure, it looked more like a huge open pit on the ground, with the entrance resembling a city gate. Inside the slave enclosure, it was said that there was a structure similar to a spiral staircase, with the side rocky walls featuring one cell after another, filled with slaves as well as various low-level demons treated almost like cannon fodder. The gates were wide open, and a group of berserk demons stood guard, looking very restless and anxious. A major battle was happening nearby, yet they were stuck guarding due to some foolish duty requirements. Didn't expect these guys to still be here, Reap quietly peeked out and said with a tinge of disappointment. Will they let us in? Paladin asked softly, noting the large group of demons guarding. Clearly, forcing their way in was not feasible. A chaotic clamor erupted from inside the slave enclosure, which at first resembled a colony of hornets that had their nest disturbed, but quickly escalated to the level of a tavern brawl. A large group of coward devils burst out from within the slave enclosure like goats being released from their pens, followed by several goblin overseers that resembled giant flies. Trailing at the back was a large demon, 15 feet tall with deep red skin and a beast-like head sporting 2 horns, but the most striking feature were its 4 arms, 2 human-like arms with palms that had 4 fingers each, and 2 extremely thick limbs resembling crab pincers. Lancelot knew this to be a succubus, a demon that preferred seduction over violence to destroy mortals, and unlike demons, they never attempted to fulfill any promises made to mortals. These demons were not welcome in Twin Bridges town, as Tajana believed they reduced the work efficiency of mortals, but it seemed the Lord of Oasis Fort had a different opinion. The berserk demons guarding the gate eagerly watched the cannon fodder charge into battle. Several of them, unable to contain themselves, also joined the charge but were swiftly knocked back by the pincers of the succubus. Keep this damned gate secured. The succubus roared, if I come back and find the gate intact yet any of you missing, you'd better be dead at the hands of the demons, or else I will slice open your bellies and pull out your insides one by one. The berserk devils whimpered and retreated, once again proving that fear was the most effective means of ruling over demons. It's ironic, Paladin laughed, shaking his head, that demons, creatures utterly dominated by violence and the desire to destroy, are most afraid of pain. A demon captured alive by demons would spill all they knew within minutes, no need for high-level spellcasters' assistance. I'm afraid these big toads won't let us in, lamented the werewolf with a pained expression. Entry to the slave enclosure requires a slaver's certification, a token issued by Molo that allows slavers to rent a warehouse inside to store their inventory. I can't get such a thing now. What do we do then? Bruto asked anxiously, do we just wait here for them to leave on their own? Exactly. There is a real blood battle outside, and without high-level demons watching, want to bet how long these big toads can hold out. Bruto closed his mouth and said no more, as everyone patiently hid in the shadows of the building across from the slave enclosure, pricking up their ears to the sounds around them. Lancelot, touching a mountain crystal equivalent to a middle-grade spirit stone, restored his true chi for the possible upcoming battle. His hearing was much more sensitive than the others, clear on any significant noise within a mile radius. The latest battle occurred less than 600 feet from them, mostly between beard demons and mercenaries within Oasis Fort, as he heard the distinctive sound of the beard demon's large cleaver, the screech of colliding weapons, and the particular crunch when plate armor was breached. The victorious side marched off in uniform steps, and he knew without guessing who the winners were. Faint yet dense battle sounds drifted from farther away. The siege was still intensely underway, mixed with the rage-filled roars of demons in battle and their dying wails. By contrast, the demons were much quieter, save for occasional loud, crude language that seemed like shouting orders. From the sounds, the attack seemed to be occurring from all directions. The demonic lines had not collapsed, but the falling boulders were gradually destroying key defensive structures. Chapter 111. The siege engines launching these boulders seemed to have poor accuracy, many of the stones smashed into the city instead of hitting the walls. This didn't quite fit with the strict impression demons usually made on people, and it was likely because these siege engines were hastily assembled. Then the question arose, where to find the materials to build these siege engines? Old Reap, aside from that forest to the south of the city, are there any other woods nearby? No, this plain has a severe allergy to most plants. The werewolf shrugged his shoulders. Why do you ask? I was wondering where these stone-launching devices were made. Lancelot pointed upwards as a burning fireball flew about 50 feet above their heads and smashed a stone tower nearby to rubble. A few berserk demons crawled out from the ruins, bellowing in anger. The few pieces of cloth they wore were on fire, but the tannery possessed high flame resistance. Such flames couldn't cause much damage but were enough to ignite the demons' anger. I see what you mean, the werewolf said dryly, there probably aren't many demons left there now. What I mean is, the battle has already begun, right? And the wolfmen's tunnels usually have many exits, so slipping out unnoticed shouldn't be hard. We'll talk about it when the time comes. The werewolf made some sense, so Lancelot didn't dwell on the topic any longer. As long as they weren't emerging right in the middle of the demon camp, there shouldn't be a problem. He had just slaughtered a succubus today and was brimming with confidence. On the other hand, those berserk demons who had climbed out from the ruins of the tower were mumbling to each other. Out of curiosity and boredom, Lancelot focused his hearing on those giant toads and overheard the following conversation. Those damn Bartes! I'm going to break their bones and drink their brain juice. Just stay put. Legion Commander Raziel ordered us to hold this tower. Do you want a taste of his fury? Ah! To hell with it. Such bad luck. Why did it have to be me guarding this crappy tower? Most of those Bartes are probably lining up, giving those guys on the walls the thrill of the kill, and we're stuck here guarding these damned stones. Lancelot had a flash of inspiration and, using the technique of secret sound transmission, imitated the voices and tones of the berserk demons and whispered a sentence into the ear of the loudest complaining toad. The berserk demon paused, then suddenly bellowed. What did you say? The tower is destroyed, so our mission is over. Who said that? Another confused voice of a berserk demon rang out, but it was immediately drowned out by the excited outbursts of the others. That makes sense. The tower is destroyed, so of course, there's no need to guard it anymore. Does that mean we can leave? Definitely. That's correct. It must be so. You're so smart, let's go, let's go. The battle calls for me. In an instant, the berserk demons scattered in a hurry. Some ran past the front of the slave enclosure, making those guarding the gate envious. They wanted to join them, yet didn't dare to abandon their post. Their longing looked just like a child locked up at home, gazing at playmates frolicking in the square through the window. See that? Another bunch who couldn't suppress their thirst for battle and abandoned their posts. Old Reap stuck half his head out and eyed the fleeing demons. Let's wait a bit more, those gatekeepers will definitely not be able to hold it in. Lancelot wasn't so sure in his heart, but if another rock were to smash the gate of the slave enclosure, then he might be able to pull some other tricks. Thinking of this, he suddenly had an idea and beckoned Paladin over. What's up? The scholar cautiously approached, curious about Lancelot's new idea. Can your illusion magic mimic the effect of a fireball falling from the sky? I'm afraid not. Paladin shook his head. Minor illusions can either create a static, small-scale illusion or produce some sound. To mimic the effect of a giant rock crashing down would require a third circle spell, advanced illusion, but I've already used up my only third circle spell slot during the fight with the succubus. Do you have any plans? Phil asked curiously, can my bombs help in any way? I'm thinking, if we can destroy that gate, then the demons won't have anything left to guard, Lancelot explained. At the same time, if we can convince the big toads that the destruction was the work of the devil's siege engines, maybe that would be enough to drive them off. Oh! That's a good idea. Phil rubbed his hands excitedly. I have several bombs that can utterly destroy that gate. I originally planned to go up and talk to them myself while Paladin created an illusion of a falling fireball. While the demons were distracted by the sky, you'd throw your bombs and blow the area to smithereens, then persuade the berserk demons to seek revenge on the devils. Lancelot shrugged. Looks like that's not going to work now. Oh, no. Like a child learning there's no gift for midwinter, Phil was anxious, pacing back and forth on the ground. I love that idea so much. Paladin, can't you cast another third circle spell? Aren't there any second circle spells that might work? Those big toads are stupider than you think, even a fake illusion would fool them. I'm sorry, but I'm afraid that's not possible. Paladin looked apologetically at everyone. Alamir, Uncle Vito, do any of your divine arts have something that can help? The elf priest and his dwarf companion exchanged a glance and helplessly shook their heads. The goblin looked miserably wronged. He sulkily took a dimensional bag off his waist and pulled out a massive bomb, 2 heads taller than himself, and caressed the black shell as if it were a lover, muttering to himself. Don't be sad, Cassalilia, Daddy will find you a better home next time, I promise. This guy's completely lost it, Old Reap anxiously observed the giant bomb. I think we'd better stand back. Anything this guy makes in my line of sight makes me uncomfortable. Lancelot has provided a good line of thought. Paladin stroked his perfectly sculpted succubus chin. How much does this thing weigh? Approximately 247 pounds, 12¾ ounces. Phil reported the exact number immediately. The goblin looked at the disguised scholar with hope. What are you thinking? If a fake illusion won't do, why not just use the real thing? For once, a mischievous smile appeared on Paladin's face. First, let me confirm, this bomb won't explode from moving and shaking during transport, will it? Chapter 112. She's called Cassalilia. The goblin huffed, pulling out a small box from his pocket with a big red button on it, and a metal wire at the top. It's only when you press this button on the remote control that she'll explode. No matter if you throw her off a cliff or chuck her into a foundry, Cassalilia, like a stubborn nun, will refuse to show you her true passion. Impressive, but can you put that remote away first? Paladin asked nervously, eyeing the device in the goblin's hand. Lancelot, are you able to carry this thing and fly? Are you joking? Of course not. Lancelot shook his head, but couldn't I just put it in the dimensional bag? Right, didn't think of that, Paladin said with an embarrassed smile. Last question, Phil, this Cassalilia, right? What's her explosion radius approximately? I've never tested it, Phil shrugged. Listen, each bomb like Cassalilia is a work of art. Have you ever seen 2 paintings that are exactly the same? What he wants to know is, how far away do we need to be standing to be safe when this bomb explodes? The werewolf interrupted the goblin's endless self-promotion, clearly annoyed. You'd better give us a conservative number, though I'm sure I'll be enjoying your fireworks from twice that distance. 100 feet will do, the goblin said, puffing out his chest and looking squarely at the werewolf. Got it, 300 feet then. Come on. Phil deflated. If you want to enjoy a sexy explosion, you need to be close enough. Wow. Thank heavens, there are no holes to stick on the bomb, such a pity. Old Reap rolled his eyes and spread his hands to everyone, making it clear that this goblin was beyond help. So you want me to fly over those guys' heads and then drop this bomb, right? Lancelot said with interest to the scholar, but a flying succubus is just too eye-catching. How are you planning to solve this problem? At these words, Paladin smiled and pulled out a scroll from underneath his robe, saying, Second level magic invisibility spell, heard of it? This spell can make you invisible, and all your equipment will become invisible with you, lasting for about an hour. If you make an attack or cast a spell, you'll break this state, Paladin explained with the enthusiasm of a salesman, but I guess taking something out of the dimensional bag shouldn't break the state, right? That works. Bruto exclaimed, there must be some rule against doing that. Worth a try. Lancelot found the idea brilliant. The worst case is breaking invisibility, right? These big toads barely have necks, they won't be looking up at the top of their heads all the time. It should work. Old Reap the werewolf also changed his stance. These demons have been pent up for a while, just a little more provocation, and they'll surely rush to a fight to the death with the other demons. Add this to make the effect look even more authentic. Priest Wit, the dwarf priest, joined in, holding a bottle that looked like mercury. Apply it on the surface of the bomb, and as soon as the wind blows, it will burn intensely, looking exactly like the fireballs shot by the demons. You've got such a thing? What are we waiting for? Phil was impatient. Let's get started already. Have you gone mad? We're less than 100 feet from that gate, and I don't want to enjoy your explosion at such close range. The werewolf gave the goblin a look and then surveyed the surroundings. Let's walk down the street, at least another 500 feet. I'm not leaving, the goblin puffed. This is the best spot to appreciate the beauty of the explosion, and I still have to remotely detonate the bombs. Are you sure? The werewolf looked at him incredulously. Even though I've always believed the world would be safer if you were dead, I don't really want to see you blown into many pieces of flesh with my own eyes. Oh, that's so sudden. Phil looked genuinely moved. Thank you for your concern, my dear brother. Actually, I feel the same about you. I mean, I'll dig a small hole, and when the explosion happens, I'll just hide inside and everything will be fine. Don't worry, there's a reason I've survived until now. You have to trust the experience of an alchemist specialized in explosives. Fine, suit yourself. But don't forget, those guys who got blown up thought the same, and they didn't get to come back and tell their colleagues what they did wrong. Haha, don't worry, it'll definitely be fine. The goblin looked very happy. What do you say, you want to stay and enjoy this fleeting beauty with me? I can see just as well from a distance. The werewolf rolled his eyes. There probably isn't anyone who wants to stay with this madman, right? Unexpectedly, the halfling Kola raised her little arm. I'm quite curious, Kola said somewhat sheepishly, this being the first time she had spoken up in quite a while. I'm an alchemist too, although my specialty is primarily potions, but I'm also interested in explosives. It's a great learning opportunity. You're an alchemist too? Alamir looked very surprised. I always thought you were a professional chef. All halflings are professional chefs, Kola shrugged, but to reach my level, you still need a little help from alchemy. Oh. My dear colleague. The goblin's face turned emerald green with excitement. You've read Dr. Alfred's notes, haven't you? Casa Lilia is using the alchemical formula of that yellow explosive. It's safe, controllable, and powerful. Wow. Really? I've always wanted to try, but the ingredients for making that fire oil are too hard to find. Ha ha ha, that's because you haven't encountered coward devils, a type of low-rank demon almost as when it comes to status, completely fatty, whose fat is the best ingredient for it. The halfling race is full of curiosity, Colin explained to the somewhat stunned Lancelot. This often leads them into all sorts of trouble, like being trapped in a demon brothel as a chef, but halflings always believe they have the luck to get out of these predicaments. I heard halflings are the goddess of luck's favorites and they bring good fortune to their companions. Lancelot shrugged. Judging by the current situation, her luck does seem pretty good. The nearby Alamir swallowed hard. I can still cast a third circle divine art, but resurrection can't restore limbs that have been blown off, so if possible, try to keep your body intact. Oh, don't worry, I won't die. The goblin had already taken out a small shovel and started digging a hole on the spot. If I do die, don't bother resurrecting me. I don't want to go through the pain of death only to come back and see your ugly mug again. I don't want that either. The werewolf shook his head. Let's walk a little farther and then use that invisibility technique scroll. We don't want those big toads to see the flash of magic. Chapter 113. A moment later. Lancelot carefully flapped his wings and gradually rose in the air. Colin's invisibility spell had taken effect on him, but if one looked closely, one would still notice a significant refraction of light as it passed through his body, as if his body had become a transparent fish tank. However, if one didn't pay special attention, it was indeed difficult to notice the strange change in the light, and just as he had guessed, none of the berserk demons near the gate were paying attention to what was above their heads. He was very sure of this, since demons without necks, if attempting to tilt their heads back over 60 degrees, would present a comically out-of-character temperament for their species, which would be very conspicuous from his vantage point. Worried that moving too vigorously might disrupt the effect of the invisibility spell, Lancelot dared not fly too fast. However, the view from up high was very wide open, allowing him to see many things clearly. Oasis Fort now resembled a burning donut, with the entire ring of walls set ablaze. This was a common trick used by demons in battle against demons. Although the Tannery demons had high resistance to flames, the Barthez demons were completely immune to fire. The siege was fiercely intense, and by his reckoning, only an hour had passed since the demons launched the first boulder. Lancelot had experienced sieges before, the shortest one lasted nearly half a year, and from the posture of the demons, seemed they planned to end this battle before sunrise. Thanks to Molo's near psychotic sixth sense, a tripled guard force kept the walls from falling at the first onslaught. Without the walls, the undisciplined demons would have quickly fallen into a state of every demon for himself and then been systematically devoured by teams of demon soldiers. It looked like the demons could hold out for a while longer, unless the demons had some tricks up their sleeves. And incongruously distant from this heated battle was the oasis in the eastern part of the town. This rare source of life in the abyssal plain remained indifferent to the slaughter unfolding next to it, with even the occasional fallen boulder seeming unable to stir the expected ripples. He shifted his gaze downward, observing the target he was to disrupt shortly. The slave pen looked like a large pit on the ground. It had a radius of about 1,000 feet, and a depth of more than 500 feet. There was no light source at the bottom of the pit, and his unstablished eyes could not see clearly inside. Lancelot mobilized a bit of his true chi to focus on his eyes, but he immediately regretted doing so. Enjoy more content from Empire. What met his eyes was a scene of shocking impact. Billions of skeletons filled the bottom of the pit like the sand in an hourglass. Lancelot's enhanced vision allowed him to discern many details, such as nearly all the skulls lacking antlers, while some bodies not yet fully decomposed revealed how this horrifying pile of skeletons had formed. Like the ironware produced by Twin Bridges town, mortal slaves were a specialty of Oasis Fort. Demon lords needed slaves for labor, while demons coveted their souls. Lancelot suddenly wished that the bomb Phil had given him had a bit more power, enough to send this accursed place and its wickedness sky high. But he was well aware that destroying Oasis Fort would not change anything, it was merely an insignificant reflection of the evil inherent in the lower planes. Destroying it would likely just lead to something even worse taking its place. Moreover, according to Tajena, Oasis Fort was situated on a key trade route to Twin Bridges town. The ability to transport goods via magic was limited and costly, and maintaining the flow on this trade route was crucial for supporting the large mortal population of Twin Bridges town. Thoughts flashed through his mind as Lancelot soared approximately 150 feet above the slave enclosure entrance. He had never reached this altitude before, and the succubus wings seemed ill-suited for flying this high. Now, he found each foot of ascent arduous, and the high winds made it challenging to maintain balance. Looking down from this distance, the berserk demons had shrunk to the size of fingernails. He checked his position, confirming he was directly overhead the target, but without reference points, this was much more difficult than it seemed. Fortunately, he didn't expect the device to cause much harm. The bomb was like a tiny spark thrown into a haystack, meant to ignite the berserk demon's fury. With just a whisper of a secretive incantation, he hoped to incite them to recklessly seek out the demons for a fierce battle. Considering the wind's influence, Lancelot flew forward a few more feet. At that moment, a pattern of lights long, short, and continuously repeating flickered from a corner on the ground below. It was Phil signaling to him that it was time to drop the bomb. Lancelot took a deep breath, reaching into the dimensional bag and felt for the smooth body of the bomb and the handle made for gripping. He then yanked the bomb out of the dimensional bag. Space and matter around the opening of the bag were strangely distorted, returning any object passing through to its normal size. The bomb, weighing over 200 pounds, made him plummet downward, far exceeding what his succubus wings were capable of carrying. Lancelot quickly let go, allowing the bomb to fall freely downwards. Lancelot raised his hands, pleased to find himself still invisible. He flapped his wings to ascend, eager to witness the bomb's explosion. The goblin's over-the-top reactions piqued his curiosity. Seconds later, the surface of the bomb began to emit a blaze, powered by a dwarven incendiary. Aside from being slightly small and too vertically aligned, it looked strikingly similar to the fireballs launched by demons using siege weapons. Lancelot was satisfied with his accuracy. From his perspective, the bomb would land within 20 feet of the slave enclosure gate. This level of precision should suffice. As the bomb's descent sped up, it emitted a sharp whistling noise. The big toads looked around uneasily, but for these necklace demons, spotting a threat coming directly from above was too difficult. It was only when the bomb was less than 50 feet above their heads that some of the berserk demons noticed the incoming fireball. By then, its descent was too swift, and the toads on the ground had no time to dodge. The fiercely burning bomb trailed a long tail of flames, allowing Phil, who was observing from a short distance, to clearly see its position. He needed to detonate it just before it hit the ground. If not, the triggering mechanism might get damaged by the impact. However, he could not do it too early, otherwise, the bomb would explode mid-air, greatly reducing its destructive power. Chapter 114. The goblin seized the perfect moment, pressing the red button on the remote control just as the bomb was less than 10 feet from the ground. However, like most goblin-made devices, something malfunctioned, and the bomb didn't detonate immediately. Instead, it smashed directly onto a berserk demon, grinding the nearly 8-foot-tall demon into a disgusting mound of flesh. What's going on? This can't be. Phil repeatedly pressed the red button and then knocked the controller against the ground, but nothing happened. Meanwhile, the group of berserk demons at the gate had excitedly gathered around to enjoy their comrades' creatively gruesome death. Just then, perhaps due to the impact of hitting the ground, the bomb inexplicably started working again. The goblin pressed the red button on the remote once more, and a sudden flash restored the sparkle to his face. Get down! He threw himself to the ground and reached out to pull the halfling down with him. Lancelot's vision was instantly filled with an intense white light. Fortunately, the true chi he had focused in his eyes beforehand provided protection, or else he would have been blinded for a long time. Realizing something wasn't right, he activated his wings with true chi and flapped them desperately, flying away as fast as he could. As the light began to fade, Lancelot saw a blazing fireball rising, with a column of smoke below it. Together they formed a jellyfish-like shape, slowly moving upward. Lancelot felt a wave of regret. It seemed that the werewolf's accusations and precautions against the goblins were justified, and he should have realized this after witnessing the bomb that had killed 3 beard demons. But regret was useless now. He flapped his wings viciously, increasing his speed, then folded them to minimize resistance. He also circulated the true chi throughout his body to ensure its maximal strength. After all, having survived an explosion before, he knew exactly what was coming next. The shockwave caught up to him about 15 seconds after the detonation, the violent air current making him feel like a football being fiercely kicked by a giant. Thankfully, he was high in the sky, where there was nothing but air, which greatly weakened the shockwave's lethal force. Lancelot was pushed by the wind and tumbled through the air, but he managed to control his rolling body and realized he was nearly blown outside of Oasis Fort. Now, with a few flaps of his wings, he could leave Oasis Fort and accomplish his goal of escape. But this would likely mean doom for the companions he left inside the fortress. From a purely selfish perspective, this was undoubtedly the best option, but Lancelot couldn't abandon his friends. He struggled to determine his bearings, attempting to locate the slave enclosures. It was not difficult. A mushroom-shaped cloud of smoke was rising slowly, no doubt the handiwork of Phil. The entrance, as large as a city gate, was completely destroyed, with fierce flames burning over an area of 50 feet in diameter, making even the stones seem ablaze. Continue reading at Empire. Oh my goodness, that's too powerful, Lancelot thought with a shiver of fear. He was glad to be flying high, otherwise, it would have been truly dangerous. Wait, Phil and Kola were less than 100 feet from the gate. How were they now? Lancelot's heart tightened, and he quickly flew towards the explosion site. It had to be said that the past minute had improved his flying skills more than all his previous practice combined. He was now flying very proficiently and soon landed at the spot where he had stood earlier. The derelict building that had served as their cover was now just a pile of rubble, stones completely covering the small hole Phil had dug. Phil. Kola. Are you still alive? He could no longer worry about attracting the attention of demons and called out loudly, but the pile of debris offered no reply, an ominous sign. Lancelot quickly began digging through the rubble and had only picked up a few pieces when more arms joined him. He looked up and realized that Bruto and the others had arrived. The dwarves were all stained blood red with some mysterious liquid, their armor crevices hanging with suspiciously composed minced meat, as if they had crawled straight out of sausage stuffing. What happened to you guys? Don't even mention it, Bruto shook his head, continuing with the task at hand. Lancelot cast an inquisitive glance at Colin, who shrugged briefly in explanation. There was one, or maybe several, berserk demon bodies that got blasted onto us. They looked as though they came straight out of a meat grinder. Oh, Lancelot pursed his lips, that must have been quite an unforgettable scene. Meanwhile, Alamir had begun to chant the resurrection art spell, ready to pull his friend's soul back from the netherworld. As everyone was halfway through digging, the debris suddenly began to churn on its own, and Goblin Phil burst out from underneath, followed by the not quite lucid halfling Kola. Ahem, ahem, ahem. What's everyone busy with? Did you see that? Old Reap delivered a kick, sending Phil straight back to the ground. Goddamn Goblin, your explosions never have a consistent yield. How come you didn't get blown to bits this time, you green-skinned monkey? The werewolf looked very agitated. The explosion, far exceeding expectations, had clearly triggered many unpleasant memories for him. Oh! Old Reap! I'm so glad to see you too. The goblin's hearing seemed to be off, and he wasn't aware that he was kicked over, showing a sincere smile to the werewolf. Did you see that beautiful mushroom cloud? Wasn't it awesome? The werewolf rolled his eyes and turned away from the explosion maniac. Hey! Alamir! Kola greeted the elf with enthusiasm, his face full of excitement, like a child who had played to his heart's content outside. Seeing that Goblin Phil and Kola were all right, Lancelot couldn't help but sigh in relief. He turned his head toward the site of the explosion. The raging fire had gradually died down, and where the gate once stood, there was now a large hole with nothing within a 3-foot radius around it. There were no remnants of demons at the scene. The blast had scattered their remains far and wide, some still lodged in the crevices of the dwarves' armor. Clearly, the next planned step to deceive the guards into a final battle with the demons was no longer necessary, for there were no guards left to deceive. So we can go in now, right? He looked at the werewolf, who was also assessing the damage caused by the explosion. Of course, the werewolf shrugged, there's no one to stop us now. Chapter 115. A group of people circled around the pit on the ground that seemed not yet fully solidified and entered the interior of the slave enclosure. Along the walls of the pit, a descending passageway was built that spiraled around several times, appearing to reach all the way down to the bottom. An eerie layer of black mist hovered above the pile of skeletons at the bottom, obscuring the details of the pit's depths from their vantage point. For Lancelot, who knew all too well what lay beneath, the black veil offered little comfort. What's down there? Bruto asked curiously, staring at the bottom of the pit. Seems like there's something dense and numerous. There lies the pit of corpses. The werewolf Reap stroked his chin. Just to give you a heads up, there are billions of skeletons down there, filling up the entire bottom of the pit. It's a scene of horror you blokes from the prime material plane haven't even seen in your nightmares. If any of you are scared of seeing skulls or have claustrophobia, you'd better find a blindfold now. The group exchanged silent glances, and it was Bruto who eventually spoke. And what's with this layer of black mist? I don't know, the resentment of the unjustly dead? Souls that can't leave? With so many corpses piled up, isn't it normal to have some strange phenomena? Reap shrugged, the sun in the plains of the abyss is weak. Even at noon, its light can't dispel that black mist. Has this black mist always been so thick? Paladin asked, frowning as he looked towards the bottom of the pit. I mean, it's almost tangible. Seems thicker than when I was here last time. The werewolf scratched his head. To be honest, I haven't paid much attention to it. Whenever I sneak in here, there are troubles more worthy of my attention than this black mist. Where's the entrance to that secret passage? The Goblin Phil approached one side of the path, examining the interior of the slave enclosure. We're not going to have to go down to the very bottom, are we? If the entrance were somewhere else, it'd have been discovered long ago. The werewolf replied and urged the group to move on. Let's get going. If we walk fast, it should take us about half an hour to get to the bottom. Go down. Phil let out a cry of despair, and Kola, who was about the same height as him, also showed a fearful expression. Do we have to circle around and around? Isn't there any shortcut or something? Sure, you can just jump down. The werewolf said sarcastically to the goblin, but I don't see any wings on you. But Sir Lancelot has wings. Kola raised his hand excitedly. We can all climb into his dimensional bag and wait until he flies down, then he can let us out. When you entered it before, you were in a state of suspended animation. Can living people also go into a dimensional bag? Lancelot asked curiously. No problem, as long as the oxygen inside hasn't run out. Paladin answered assuredly. The new storage bag you have is pretty much empty, right? Lancelot nodded. Paladin was referring to the storage bag Alamir found in the body of the succubus, which now only contained his giant sword Glacier and nothing else. If all of us go in, the oxygen inside should last for about 1 minute. Paladin said cheerfully, pay attention to the time when you fly. When it's about time, let us out for some air. Alright, I'll stick one hand into the bag later. If you guys feel stuffy, just pull on my hand. Awesome! You're really a genius! Phil exclaimed in excitement as he hugged Kola and spun around, eliciting giggles from the latter. I feel my way of thinking was too narrow, the werewolf shook his head, this thing has so many uses. I've definitely got to get a dimensional bag for myself. Haha, being an adventurer means you have to learn to adapt on the fly, Bruto said with a chuckle. The young dwarf now considered himself an adventurer. We're about to go underground and might even encounter some battles. Paladin pulled out a bag filled with bottles and vials from beneath his robe. I have here some antitoxin potions and night vision potions. Drink up if you need them. Ha, us dwarves are born with night vision and poison resistance. Keep your potions for the others, Bruto said nonchalantly, walking towards the dimensional bag that Lancelot had placed on the ground. I'm going in first. Hurry up, everyone. Find your next read at Empire. Aside from Kola and Paladin, everyone else present had night vision capabilities. The halfling picked up 2 potions, saying somewhat sheepishly. Thank you, Mr. Paladin. I'm sorry for the trouble. I'm quite skilled at making potions myself, and I'll definitely return the favor someday. Don't mention it, Paladin winked at her, I'm sure I'll be drinking plenty of your potions in the future. The antitoxin potion was much more popular. Except for the dwarf, nearly everyone drank a bottle, Lancelot included. The dark green, semi-transparent potion left a memorable impression with its taste like a blend of bitter melon, lemon, and mint leaves. But once it was swallowed, it brought an incredibly strong sensation of coolness, as if even the air taken into the lungs was much fresher. One after another, the group jumped into the dimensional bag. Even Paladin, who was still wearing the transformation ring and carried the form of a succubus, went in the scholar had never practiced using the wings of a succubus body, so jumping down was about as effective as holding an umbrella. Lancelot picked up the dimensional bag, reaching one hand inside. Someone tapped on the back of his hand. It was Paladin's, since it was a succubus claw and matched his current state. He walked to the edge of the road and leaped down with a bound. In mid-air, the succubus knight dove down the curved edge of the large pit like a swallow. By slightly adjusting the angle of his wings, he could change the direction of flight, which was a technique he had just mastered. As he descended, he noticed demon guards patrolling the path that circled the pit walls. These demons were checking each cell, and when they found one filled with coward devils or prime demons who were cannon fodder for the battles, they were immediately released and driven to run upward. From time to time, some demons would notice Lancelot flying past, but after a mere glance, they would look away. Succubi held a special status in demon society. Wherever they wanted to go, they went, and no one interfered. Under normal circumstances, these demons might have tried to show off their masculine charms to the succubus, but at the moment, no one had time to pay attention to her. In less than a minute, Lancelot reached the bottom of the pit. From this distance, the bottom of the pit was like a desert made of bones. Lancelot spared a moment of sympathy for the mental state of everyone and proceeded to pull each of his companions out of the dimensional bag, one by one. Chapter 116. By Moradin's long beard. I effing hit a big hammer. After coming out of the dimensional bag, Bruto was instantly shocked by the surrounding scene, repeatedly exclaiming in horror, "What in the blazes is this damned place? This is the corpse pit." The werewolf patted the young dwarf's shoulder. "I warned you, get used to it." In fact, that Bruto could still swear was quite impressive. Aside from old Reap, who had been here before, all the others fell into a state of severe shock, staring blankly around them, shocked into a loss of speech by this overwhelmingly impactful scene. The most strongly affected were Alamir and Vito. These two good-aligned priests were shaking violently, seemingly driven to the brink of madness by this mountain of evidence of sin. Lancelot silently exercised the ice heart technique and gently coughed. The voice, carrying true chi, was like the tolling of a bell in a desolate valley, awakening those in a state of shock. How on earth was this place formed? Paladin muttered, the trembling in his voice betraying the fear in his heart. To prevent slaves from escaping, slavers nailed the cages tight during transport, not opening them until they arrived at Oasis Fort. When they finally reached the fort, oftentimes less than half of the slaves in the cages were still alive. And those who died along the way. The werewolf said grimly, stamping his foot, their bodies were thrown here. May the souls of these sufferers find peace with their gods, Alamir said with a face full of sorrow. He worshipped Chennai, the god of love, who under the lady's blessing celebrated the beauty of love, and these victims naturally could no longer taste the flavor of love. Rest in the embrace of the Father God, my fellow brethren. Vito crouched on the ground, sadly caressing a skull that clearly belonged to a dwarf. Such thick-topped skulls were common, because of the dwarves' exceptional skills in stonemasonry and forging. They were the slave race most favored by the demon lord. It is said that Tajana did not attempt to enslave dwarves at the very start of Twin Bridges town, perhaps only succubi, a rare type of demon not dominated by the desire for destruction, could understand that enslavement is the least efficient form of rule. The gaze of the people gradually cleared, but the surrounding scene was so oppressive that no one really wanted to talk. Wahaha! Finally, some living people. Hello there! Need any help? Just then, a creaking voice suddenly emerged, startling everyone. Lancelot looked in the direction from which the voice came and saw a metallically gleaming skull hovering there out of thin air. Experience new tales on Empire. It seemed that the skull was the one talking. It looked no different from a typical human skull, yet instead of magical flames in its eye sockets, it had a pair of eyes that appeared quite normal. The eyes, unfleshed, were as large as chicken eggs, but this gave it more of a living creature's sense, making it seem less horrifying. Seeing Lancelot looking over, the skull swayed back and forth in the air, as if waving a hand. The skull's mandible kept opening and closing, and the voice they had just heard floated out of its mouth. Let's see, we have a human with a transformation ring, a dwarf wielding a hammer, a halfling clutching a weapon, an elf with the holy emblem of the fiery-haired lady, as well as a goblin and a half-werewolf. You must be an adventurer team, right? This is great. Just great. What are you, exactly? Lancelot asked cautiously. What you want to ask is what kind of thing I am, the skull said, using its only movable jawbone and eyeballs to make a laughing expression. I'm undoubtedly dead, but I must have once been alive, and quite possibly did something unforgivably evil to have ended up like this. Are you a Mimir? Paladin suddenly asked. I've heard of such creatures. It's said that at the center of all realms, in a place where divine power can't tread, there's a massive circular city like a labyrinth. In it, there are many skulls floating in mid-air, serving as guides. Mark City is hardly the center of all realms. Only those who have never been there would think so. It's at best a toll station at a crossroads, the skull said with a contemptuous tone. I've heard about this thing too, the goblin Phil said, looking up while circling the skull floating in the air. Some say it comes from a chaotic good plane, but others have seen pillars covered with these kinds of skulls in Barto Hell. I can't answer that question either, the skull expressed helplessly. You don't know yourself? Lancelot asked with curiosity. I've lost most of my memories. The skull made a helpless gesture. I know how to use language, and my mind is filled with knowledge about Mark City and other outer layer planes, but I don't know anything about my own past experiences. My memory starts at the bottom of a dark pile of bones, which took me who knows how long to crawl out of, and since then I've been trapped in this desert made of bones. Do you still remember your name? How long have you been here? Lancelot continued to ask. The place was full of bones, the air too chaotic, so he hadn't sensed this creature's presence before. The only name I remember is Ekmund, so I guess that's my name. As for how long I've been here. The skull glanced with its mouth. Since the first time I saw the sky above, I've witnessed the alternation of light and darkness 10,000 times. My only pastime has been to watch the fresh corpses thrown down from above. If I'm lucky, I come across some that can still breathe and can chat with them for a while. Other than that, there's nothing else. This life is really driving me mad. Can't you fly? Lancelot asked, noting there were no supports under the skull. Why not just fly out of here? I can only fly up to 6 feet off the ground. With this height, I can't possibly fly out. By the way, I suspect that was my height when I was alive. And with only a mouth, I can't climb rocks. Don't ask me how I know, the skull chattered rapidly, clearly excited to be able to talk to someone. According to my observations, the height of these bones rises about half a foot every 100 days, which means I have to wait another 30,000 plus days to reach that circular platform. Then, I could follow the spiral upwards and escape from this maddening tedium, but now you've come, which is truly a godsend. Have you seen this guy before? Lancelot, seeing that the skull was quite the chatterbox, quietly asked Reap while it babbled on. No, the entrance to the secret passage is there, and I've always made a point of leaving this ghastly place as quickly as possible. The werewolf shook his head, pointing to a certain spot on a platform on the edge of the pit of bones. When I said at the bottom of the pit I meant the deepest part accessible by road. I've never actually hopped onto this mountain of bones. Chapter 117. How about it, take me with you? Ekmund, the talking skeleton, scanned everyone with hopeful eyes. I don't consume your provisions, nor do I take up much space. If you need to fight, my forehead is much harder than it looks. And, although it's hard to believe, my bite is quite strong. Occasionally, some corpses here get up again, and these guys usually don't like me, but now they've turned into shattered bones. A strange talking skeleton. Paladin turned to Lancelot, but I've heard that Mimir is indeed very useful to adventurers. Shall we take him, Lancelot? Continue your saga on Empire. Why not? Lancelot shrugged. I've heard talkative guys aren't usually that bad. Yahoo! That's great! The skeleton rejoiced, spinning in midair. You're called Lancelot, right? From now on, may I call you my boss? Sure. Hey, wait, that's not right. How come there was no reaction? Ekmund, confused, swayed in midair, looking as if an invisible hand were slapping his skeleton head. Could you please take off the transformation ring on your right finger, and let's do it again? Do what again? Lancelot cautiously asked. Why should I take off the transformation ring? Let me call you boss again. Ekmund seemed equally puzzled. I don't understand why, but I'm quite sure it's important, and it's likely your transformation ring interfering. Lancelot considered for a moment and took off the ring, but before doing so, he mobilized his true chi to protect his entire body, enhanced his spirit perception to the maximum, and silently activated the Ice Heart technique, which is particularly effective against psychic attacks, to guard against any unforeseen events. A flash of magical light passed, and Lancelot's form changed back to that of a human knight. Hello, handsome. So, may I call you boss from now on? Sure. As soon as Lancelot spoke, a clicking sound like gears turning came from inside the skeleton's head, and a golden light shot from his eye sockets. Their conversation seemed to have triggered some magical mechanism, and Ekmund appeared to be gripped by something, frozen in midair. A familiar feeling of gratitude approached Lancelot, somewhat similar to when Dink had handed over the demon essence to him. A bond was established between him and Ekmund, although it was very weak. With heightened spirit perception, he sensed some information trying to pour directly into his sea of consciousness. Lancelot was not unfamiliar with this process, but the previous times it happened his mind became crowded with a lot of information before he could understand what was happening. This time, however, a small bamboo slip in his sea of consciousness emitted a green radiance blocking the flow of information. Lancelot sent out his divine sense to examine the information blocked outside his sea of consciousness. The information pertained to Mimir, the talking skeletons like Ekmund. A master-servant contract had been established between him and this Mimir, and the moment it had addressed him as boss was Mimir's ceremony of acknowledging a master. Since he, as the recipient of the contract, could terminate it at any time, a mere verbal assurance was enough to make the contract effective. Once the master-servant relationship was established, they could communicate telepathically. As a servant, the Mimir must loyally serve the master and attempt to execute any command issued by the master, but this should not exceed the Mimir's own capabilities. To achieve the objective, the Mimir could independently decide the method of execution. The master must not engage in any act of malice that harms the Mimir, as that would immediately terminate the master-servant relationship. If he chose to trade away the Mimir for any benefit, or if his death occurred, the relationship would also dissolve, although the Mimir must not participate in, or permit, any actions that might lead to these outcomes. In addition, he could also use a storage space similar to a dimensional bag that Mimir carried with him, the entrance of which was located in the skeleton's mouth. Actually, this contract was quite lax, and it looked more like a sales agreement and warranty terms. A close look would reveal that although a long list of things Mimir should do as a servant was listed, there were almost no binding clauses except that neither master nor servant could harm each other. Looking at it, this thing probably really did originate from Barto Hell. All creatures from that plane had a fanatic penchant for making contracts and especially liked to be vague about some clauses to benefit themselves. All right, let's get going. The golden light in the skeleton's eyes faded, and it could move again, while Lancelot felt a call from Ekmund in his heart. Boss, can you hear me? I can. Boss, could you not mention this dang master-servant relationship to others? Ekmund's voice carried a hint of embarrassment, the term servant sounds so ugly, spare me some dignity. He had such requests too, Lancelot silently commented to himself, but he readily agreed. Lancelot put on the transformation ring again, and so his wings, claws, and other parts that a succubus would have grew out again. Ekman let out a whistle. Boss, I must say, you look absolutely stunning in your transformed state. If I didn't know you were actually a guy, no, why should I worry about these things? Lancelot decided to ignore this chatty fellow for the moment. He placed the dimensional bag on the ground, allowing everyone to re-enter it, so he could take them all to the platform at the edge of the Pit of Bones, where the secret passage's entrance was actually located. Boss, I also have a dimensional space inside me, so I can't go into that bag. The skeletal head Ekman circled above the dimensional bag. How about you carry me instead? Lancelot realized this skeleton was not only talkative but also lecherous. He picked up the dimensional bag with one hand and the skeletal head with the other, and, flapping his wings, he flew upwards. Leaving that pile of bones eased a very oppressive feeling in his heart. Although he didn't show any abnormalities, he always felt there was something not quite right about the bones beneath his feet, yet he couldn't pinpoint what was abnormal since he hadn't stood on other piles of bones. Lancelot pulled his companions out of the dimensional bag one by one, and it seemed everyone felt much lighter. Bruto surveyed the surroundings and asked. Where's the entrance to the secret passage? Right behind you. Old Reap lifted up a tarpaulin hanging on the rock wall, revealing a dark hole behind it. Isn't this a bit too obvious? The dwarf was a bit stunned. Aren't the entrances to secret passages supposed to be very hidden, appearing only when you recite a spell or move a mechanism or something? Those kinds of things used to exist, but everyone found it simpler to break the mechanism than to learn the language of the jackals. The werewolf shrugged, and who would come here for no reason, right? Chapter 118. In the dimly lit passageway, 3 dwarf temple guards marched in the front row, adept in combat within subterranean environments. Behind them, Priest Wit and 4 dwarves formed an arrowhead formation, well prepared for any crisis. Colin, Kola, Phil, and Alamir walked in the middle of the group, well protected by their teammates. Bruto and the werewolf Reap moved on the flanks, a position suitable for strikers to comfortably attack the enemy's side without the risk of being caught in a pincer. Lancelot lagged at the rear, certainly not out of fear, but rather because the bone pits gave him an uneasy feeling. He was somewhat concerned that something unpleasant might catch up and take a bite out of their rear. An underground passageway. How many great adventures have taken place in such settings? A certain enthusiastic skeleton, having been confined for far too long, darted about, studying every stone in the passageway. This place is quite spacious. Who built it? Definitely not those Tannery, they wouldn't exert effort on anything that doesn't bleed. For the Jackalwar tribe that steals corpses, Old Reap interrupted Ekman's rambling. We are descending now. The passage will go right through the bottom of the bone pit and then spiral upward, leading directly to the interior of the Jackalwar warrens outside Oasis Fort. Are there many Jackalwars at the exit? Bruto tapped his shield with his hammer. I wouldn't mind slaughtering a few stinking dogs to blow off some steam. The Jackalwar tribe that originally dug this passage is long gone, probably done in by their own necromancy. Now, there's only a small Jackalwar tribe that occupies but a tiny part of that vast network of tunnels. Old Reap shrugged. Given the current situation, I don't recommend seeking out trouble with those creatures. As they were talking, the group turned a corner and were suddenly faced with a massive cavern. The cavern was very spacious in area, but less than 12 feet high, which made the space feel oppressive. Several places in the ceiling had collapsed, letting a mass of bones spill through and accumulate into piles that reached up to the ceiling. Read latest stories on Empire. This is the doing of the Jackalwars, but at the bottom of the pit are only bones that have been dead for a long time. I guess the Jackalwars kept digging to that entrance we passed earlier to get to fresher corpses, the werewolf explained like a tour guide. Let's stop here a moment. Curiously, everyone watched as he bent over to pick up a few stones, then threw them one by one at the piles of bones. I haven't been here in a while, need to check if any of the little guys aren't resting too peacefully, Old Reap explained while throwing the stones. In these places full of death and ruin, every now and then 1 or 2 skeletons will stand back up, but there aren't many of them, and they're easy to deal with. Once, a skeleton hit my head with a femur, and guess what? That femur broke into 2 pieces just like a piece of rotting wood. I think you've told me this scenario before, Phil said skeptically to Old Reap. Last time, you said you were fighting a lich. You're mistaken, the werewolf retorted bluntly. I swear this is the first time I narrated this story. and if it's not, may a Barlow flame demon appear right before me and roast you to a crisp. I believe you, my arse. The goblin, clearly not understanding the werewolf's muddled last words, responded automatically, provoking a chuckle from the group. Old Reap laughed smugly, but his smile froze into an ugly expression as a rustling sound echoed around them. A pile of bones he had already thrown suddenly erupted with a violent commotion, as if brought to life. Countless bones poured out from it like rats shaken from their hiding spots in the heap, tumbling toward the ground and assembling into skeletons in front of everyone, too numerous to count. What the heck did you do, you dumbass? Phil cursed angrily, but the only response was the hissing roar of the skeletons, which held nothing but hatred for the living. I just threw a stone. Old Reap howled back, indignant, there were never this many before. Add latest chapters at fortuitous only. The skeletons charged at them, wielding sharp femur bones in their hands. The three dwarf temple guards at the forefront were the first to encounter the skeletons and greeted their enemies with a vicious shield bash. The heavy steel shields collided with the attackers' bone frames, resulting in a remarkable effect. Several skeletons were smashed apart on impact, their bones twitching on the ground trying to reassemble, but due to the utterly thorough shattering, they soon ran out of the magic power needed to stand back up and became still. Ha! Seems pretty simple. Seeing the enemy apparently less challenging, Bruto cheered and rushed out swinging his hammer. Phil had already pulled out a few bombs, but the sight of the dwarf already deep in the enemy ranks brought to mind the image of Lancelot punching a wall, so he begrudgingly put the explosives back. Skeletons were innately vulnerable to blunt trauma, and with Bruto's hammer endowed with mithril and his body sheathed in armor suited for a head-on charge, the young dwarf was like a bull in a china shop. The skeletons crumbled upon impact, leaving a trail of shattered bones in his wake. The werewolf, too, surged forward with his dual swords, his bearings suggesting an experienced hand at dealing with skeletons. His blades would first block the clumsy attacks of the enemy, then he'd launch a kick to shatter their bones almost as effective as the hammer. For those skeletons attempting to piece themselves back together on the ground, he'd kick their skulls far away to also prevent their revival. An unexpectedly potent fighter was Ekmund, his bald head worked like a cannonball flying through the air, smashing the skeletons to bits while the enemies struggled to land a hit on him. That guy had rushed out without even asking for Lance's opinion, clearly demonstrating the so-called master-servant contract meant little. Alamir had been ready to unleash a powerful divine art to disperse the skeletons, but seeing the warriors looking quite amused in battle, he ceased his movement and comfortably watched the spectacle. Paladin didn't plan to waste his spells on these skeletons. There was no better opportunity to utilize a sling. He hardly needed to aim, simply throwing at the dense crowds of enemies was sufficient. Kola, meanwhile, stayed put. Halflings were always clear on what they needed to do, and Kola was no exception. She was certain her larger friends didn't need her help, so she just waited. Lancelot, too, remained out of the fight, not because he believed Bruto and the others didn't appear to need his help, but because, with his spirit perception fully engaged, he had sensed a cold, malevolent wave of magic. The werewolf's words might have contained some bravado, but there was no lie about the normal circumstances here. These resurrected skeletons must have been awakened by magic, and the spellcaster was likely nearby. Chapter 119. Gradually, the number of enemies began to decline. Although these skeletons looked quite frightening, they did not pose any real threat, except to consume the physical strength of the warriors. Enjoy new adventures from Empire. But Lancelot's heart rose to his throat because at that moment his spirit perception had clearly warned him that something extremely dangerous was approaching. He was certain the danger did not come from the skeletons around him, but the chaos was too great for him to pinpoint the source of the threat. He did not dare to sit down and enter a state of spiritual sight through meditation because the hair on his neck stood on end, feeling as though a dagger was already pressed against his throat. He still maintained a relaxed posture, appearing like a succubus enjoying watching its servants fight, but beneath his wide robe, his right hand had already reached into the opening of his dimensional bag, gripping the hilt of the giant sword Glacier. As the last skeleton crumbled into a pile of bones under Bruto's hammer, the crowd erupted into cheers, and everyone relaxed. Bruto was about to boast to Lancelot about how many enemies he had taken down when he turned and found that Lancelot had not joined the fight and had remained motionless at the back of the group. Just then, a sudden change occurred. Each pile of bones started to churn, and 10 times more skeletons than before appeared before them, stretching as far as the eye could see. It was as if they were once again in a pit of corpses, only this time those bones had all come to life, ready to engulf them. Everyone was shocked by this transformation. Bruto almost rolled and crawled back to the middle of the group, while Lancelot's mind stirred, as he felt the fluctuations of magic again, and the aura displayed by the enemies did not match their numbers. Suddenly, his spirit perception started screaming like an alarm clock, and Lancelot completely instinctively lunged forward, rolling away in a very awkward posture. He looked back and saw 4 javelins quivering slightly in the ground where he had just been standing. As his gaze moved upward, 4 steel figures appeared before his eyes. At first glance, the enemy looked like human knights, clad in impractically heavy armor, with great swords 6 feet long resting on their shoulders. They were almost as tall as Lancelot, and each step they took shook the ground, looking like a group of approaching bears. Lancelot's heaviest armor weighed a full 50 pounds, but it did nothing like this. Lancelot observed his enemies carefully. The first thing he noticed was the great swords in their hands. He recognized at a glance that those swords were also made of cold iron, the same material as his own weapon, a metal particularly effective against fiends from the lower planes. Their armor was covered in dust and cobwebs. Demons, unlike demons, do not kill things out of boredom, perhaps because they are too precious and seldom mobilized. With their armor and the cold iron greatsword, one could imagine the kind of meat grinder these demons would be against the demon legion at the front lines of a blood battle. The others also saw the situation on his side, but they had already been overwhelmed by the skeleton sea and could not spare anyone to help. With the exception of one skeleton, his nominal servant Ekmund. With its small stature and hard forehead, it burst through the skeleton crowd, circling around Lancelot. "Boss, these are steel demons, the elite warriors of the Demon Legion," Ekmund said rapidly. "Be careful, they are very powerful. I can only hold off one of them, the rest is up to you." Lancelot glanced at his companions. They had their backs to a corner, 5 dwarves forming a tight defensive line, resisting the impact of the skeleton crowd. Paladin had summoned a large web in front of them to slow the enemy's passage. Phil kept throwing small bombs behind the enemy, exploding in waves of bone, and Alamir watched nervously the 5 dwarves, ready to perform divine arts of healing at any moment. Seeing that his companions could still hold on for a while, Lancelot focused his attention on the enemies before him. These 4 foes exerted tremendous pressure on him. He drew out the giant sword Glacier, discarded the robe wrapped around his body, and revealed his guise as a succubus knight. Lancelot was no stranger to this kind of duel, having faced 4 knights alone before. In fact, the little knight inside his heart was cheering wildly, for what was about to unfold was a symphony played by the clash of steel, a dance performed on the blade of death. And Lancelot was a master in this regard. The enemies didn't try to surround him but advanced in a formation with 2 in front and 2 in back, their momentum like that of a heavy infantry phalanx. Lancelot didn't rush to attack but adopted a defensive stance. He always remembered the fluctuations of magic when summoning skeletons. These 4 demons didn't look like spellcasters at all, there must be one more enemy hiding nearby, and he needed to conserve as much strength as possible to deal with this hidden foe. But the 4 steel demons had no intention of conserving their strength. The front 2 suddenly accelerated, launching a left and right overhead slash at him so fast that it caught him off guard, their previously cumbersome appearance now revealed as mere deception. Lancelot, highly alert, didn't relax his vigilance. He flickered strangely to the side with a marvelous footwork technique, sliding horizontally away, and avoided the range of the 2 great swords' attacks. Still, he swung the glacier in his hand, intending to test his opponent's strength. The 2 great swords collided, emitting a deafening boom. He and the steel demon on his left each took a step back, but it was worth noting that Lancelot's meridians were filled with true chi, and yet the opponent's strength was no less impressive. However, becoming a spiritual cultivator wasn't just about increased strength. The great sword in Lancelot's hand suddenly sped up, returning with a lightning-fast upper slash. The steel demon on the right extended his great sword to block the strike for his comrade, but his own weapon was knocked high into the air. This was all within Lancelot's calculations. He darted his right foot forward diagonally right in a lightning-like movement, then rotated his body counterclockwise, perfectly dodging the left steel demon's avoided vertical slash. Simultaneously, he clasped the great sword with both hands, using the rotation's momentum to unleash a powerful horizontal slash from right to left. The steel demon on the right's great sword was still midair, unable to return to defense in time. Lancelot's great sword, glowing with a blue light, struck his waist resolutely. The enemy was flung away by the immense impact, knocking down his teammate to his left as well. Just as Lancelot was about to pursue, the 2 steel demons who had been standing in the back already made their move toward him, disrupting his intention to chase. From the feel of striking the enemy, his intention to bisect the steel demon at the waist had failed. It seemed like the King Yun's sword art, as a wood system cultivation technique, was still somewhat lacking when facing these metal-clad foes. Chapter 120. The two enemies who had fallen to the ground got up. One of them, a steel demon, severely injured by his strike, had a huge gash at the waist, from which a large amount of blood was flowing. He barely stood up with the support of another steel demon. This showed that the King Yun's sword art was not lacking in power. Heavy armor was almost impossible to be breached by slashing weapons, yet his strike had torn through the steel demon's armor, dealing a severe injury directly. To take down an enemy in full heavy armor on the battlefield, one either relied on the terrifying impact of a lance thrust to penetrate, or used a warhammer to literally shake the enemy to death. In night duels, swords were more like tools for wrestling. You only had a chance to deal a fatal blow through the gaps in the armor after making the enemy fall. Of course, in most cases, knights who had fallen decisively surrendered. The knightly code required them to treat surrendering captives well. Killing an enemy who had surrendered was considered a highly dishonorable act. Moreover, a living knight could be exchanged for a large sum of money, enough to buy at least 2 sets of armor. Read latest stories on Empire. Damn! Boss is awesome! Ekmund exclaimed excitedly, cursing outright. That strike was really powerful. The steel demons were surprised by Lancelot's formidable combat ability. In their view, these blood-war mercenaries were merely guards for a succubus, who had accidentally run into them while fleeing, and had come on a secret mission. They thought if they killed the succubus, the morale of those mortals would quickly collapse. But clearly, that was not the case. After completing a formation rotation, Lancelot was once again facing 2 unharmed enemies. These demons no longer rushed forward but adopted a defensive posture, planning to hold him there. Lancelot had no time to waste with them. He needed to quickly take out these enemies to assist his companions surrounded by the skeleton sea. He charged once again, wielding his great sword, while Ekmund, even faster, shot forth like a cannonball, a floating skull agilely passing through the clumsy blades of the steel demons, making intimate contact with the steel demon's faceplate. With a clanging sound, the skull flew back flipping through the air. The steel demon it had hit merely shook its head, appearing completely undamaged. But it did indeed serve to tie down one of the enemies. Lancelot seized the chance for a one-on-one duel, delivering a heavy over-the-shoulder slash. The prepared steel demon raised its great sword to parry the slash, but the immense force stirred made him unstable, forcing him to kneel on one knee. Lancelot's terrible physical prowess was fully displayed at this moment. His rebounding great sword slashed down again like lightning. The enemy, still reeling from the previous attack, could only struggle to raise his sword to block. The succubus knight's second strike knocked the weapon from the steel demon's hand, and with the rebound force, his raised great sword slashed down again, aiming directly for the head of the kneeling demon. If the heavy sword slash had hit, even if the helmet had been made of diamond, the tremendous force would have been enough to break the steel demon's neck. But 2 protruding sword blades thwarted his intent to kill with one blow. 2 steel demons standing in the back timely stretched out helping hands, blocking this fatal strike for their comrade. Lancelot's sword blade skewed off course and landed on the enemy's shoulder armor. The glacier failed to pierce the steel demon's body again but created a wound deeper than 5 inches on its shoulder. The usually silent demon let out a muffled groan of pain for the first time as the right arm of the steel demon dropped powerlessly. Evidently, the entire arm was now useless. Another steel demon from the back quickly took the place of its companion, showcasing the renowned iron discipline of the demons. Most demons wouldn't bother to cover for a comrade, much less execute such tight coordination. Seeing that Lancelot had succeeded, Ekmund, who had been entangled with another steel demon, also flew back in a clumsy manner. The skeleton appeared exceedingly disheveled, with a deep sword mark on his forehead, and it seemed a few teeth had been knocked out as well. And there were bite marks on the steel throat guard of the steel demon, clearly showing this creature's considerable combat strength. However, the bite marks on the armor couldn't cause any damage. Ekmund's major contribution was buying Lancelot a chance to severely damage the enemy. "I feel like my brains caught the wind," the skeleton lamented as he looked at the tooth marks on the enemy. "Truly not worth it." "Are you all right?" Lancelot asked as he examined the deep wound on the skeleton's head, noting that the skull was unusually thick. The wound was nearly an inch deep, yet it still showed the metallic gleam of its bone quality. "Don't worry, boss, I'm not dead yet," the skeleton swayed in the air, "it will heal slowly. In a few days, my forehead will be as smooth and shiny as ever." Lancelot turned his attention back to the enemy, feeling a bit anxious. He had to deal with the enemy quickly, or his companions might truly be in danger. He still didn't understand his new teammates well enough. In his world, priests were more like a part of the ruling class, providing spiritual guidance and comfort to people. Deep down, Lancelot always thought those priests were just tricksters exploiting faith for their own gain. But in this world, the gods intervened directly in worldly affairs, and their agents in the mortal realm were the priests. These priests underwent extensive combat training, convincing enemies and conveying truths more with a nail-headed hammer than with words, not to mention they were also endowed with powerful holy magic to execute the will of the gods on earth. Seizing a fleeting opportunity, Alamir raised his shield bearing the holy emblem of Shania and exclaimed, "Without the capacity to love and be loved, there is no meaning to existence. In the name of Lady Shania, I command you, undead, to back down." This was one of the priest's most potent abilities, channeling divine power. It was as if a portal had opened inside the elves, and a vast surge of holy power poured out from his body into Shania's holy emblem. The dazzling radiance burst from the holy emblem, sweeping around like a tsunami over the skeletons encircling them. The holy energy directly destroyed the magic power sustaining the skeleton's movement. The clatter of bones hitting the ground echoed all around. However, something strange occurred. The holy nova rolled over all the skeletons in the cave, but apart from those closest to them, those in the distance pushing and shoving in eagerness to join the assault were seemingly unaffected. Moreover, though there was clearly space before them, they continued to make pushing motions in mid-air. Alamir paused momentarily, but after a short observation, he understood the reason and shouted, "Those are illusions."